Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Public Safety Committee of the Baltimore City Council. I am Councilman Brandon Scott, chair to the committee. We are joined tonight to my left by Councilman Christopher Burnett from the 8th District, member of the committee, Councilman Zeke Cohen from the 1st District, member of the committee. To my right, Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District, and Councilman Ron Dorsey from the 3rd District, Vice Chair of the committee, will be rejoining us in a second. We are also joined by Mr. Liam Davis from the Council President's Office and Richard Crumridge, staff to the committee from Legislative Services. Before we go any further, I just want to mention that the Jewish holiday of Purim begins later this evening, so if any member of the audience has to leave for services, please let us know and we'll try to accommodate you. And also would like to point out that's why our Councilman Yissi Schleifer from the 5th District is not with us this evening, and we are being rejoined by Councilman Dorsey as we speak. We are here tonight for the hearing for City Council Resolution 18-0060R, Multi-Year Coordinated Comprehensive Multi-Agency Violence Reduction Strategy, for the purpose of requesting that the Director of the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice, the Baltimore Police Commissioner, the Baltimore City Public School CEO, the State's Attorney for Baltimore City, the Director of Baltimore City Department of Recreation and Parks, the Director of Public Works, the Director of Transportation, the Housing Commissioner for Baltimore City, the Executive Director of the Housing Authority for Baltimore City, the CEO of Enoch Pratt Library, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainable Solutions, the Baltimore City Health Commissioner, the Baltimore Director of Planning, the Director of Mayor's Office of Human Services, and the Fire Chief of Baltimore City present to the City Council a multi-year coordinated comprehensive multi-agency violence reduction strategy beginning with this year in 2018. I'd like to thank everyone for being here this evening. We will hear from a panel from the Mayor's Office in a second, but here on the City Council, we like to give deference to our fellow elected officials. So, Madam State's Attorney, for now, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Public Safety Committee. Thank you for convening this hearing. As you know, now more than ever, we must come together and address the systemic issues and failed policies that have perpetuated violence in our city. Therefore, forums such as this are critical in our efforts to move our city forward. We must rid our communities, of course, and we talk about this all the time, violent repeat offenders, and I can say, since being elected as Baltimore City State's Attorney, that's exactly what we've aimed to do by restructuring the office into specialized felony units focused on prosecuting criminals as a means to reduce violence. In 2016, my team divided the General Felony Division into 3 different divisions: the Gun Violence Enforcement Division, Narcotics, and Felony Trial. This allows prosecutors to focus specifically and strategically on prosecuting cases in these areas. These units, along with my homicide division, work tirelessly to prosecute violent repeat offenders who harm our neighborhoods and terrorize our communities. And I can't say it enough, I truly have the best prosecutors in the country. In 2017, we prosecuted over 41,000 cases, including 3,800 felony cases in circuit court. As we continue to tackle the growing crime in our city, my office remains committed to reducing violence through the effective and zealous prosecution of crime. As you know, my homicide division, last year, we had 343 homicides in our city. The increase in homicides has had an immediate impact on the caseload that my prosecutors are handling. Since 2015, the average caseload of my homicide prosecutors has increased by nearly 20%. Today, homicide prosecutors in Baltimore are assigned, on average, 54 cases each, more than double the caseload of 20 cases per prosecutor, which is recommended by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. That's the national average. However, we have 54, you should have 20. Despite their heavy caseloads in 2017, the homicide unit secured 78 convictions and a conviction rate of approximately almost 80% at 77%. The Gun Violence Enforcement Division under this administration continues to tackle gun violence in our city by harnessing the expertise of Assistant State's Attorneys in the Gun Violence Enforcement Division, an investigative and prosecutorial unit made up of prosecutors and detectives housed together within my office who focus on gun offenders. rather than just gun crimes. This unit grew out of the gun collaborative partnership with the Baltimore Police Department and Johns Hopkins University. The prosecutors and detectives in GVED use intelligence from our crime strategies unit and the Baltimore Police Department's intelligence units to identify, investigate, and prosecute those prohibited from carrying firearms as well as non-fatal shootings, focusing on the top drivers of gun crime in Baltimore City. GVED's unique approach has already started to pay off. In 2017, GVED secured 93 convictions with a conviction rate of 82%. Narcotics, which was, again, a unit that was newly formed and created under this administration. Unfortunately, guns are not the only thing killing men, women, and children in Baltimore streets. In 2016, there were 694 overdose deaths in Baltimore City, more than double the number of homicides. The vast majority of those overdoses involved heroin and fentanyl. Our narcotics unit is dedicated to investigating and prosecuting criminals who traffic and distribute heroin, fentanyl, and other dangerous substances in our city. The narcotics unit uses a geographic prosecution model to fight the opioid epidemic with prosecutors assigned to specific regions of the city. Prosecutors collaborate on a near daily basis with the partners in local, state, and federal law enforcement who are also working in their assigned districts. We are also active members of the Baltimore Police Department's Overdose Task Force, which is working to identify and investigate the drug cartels distributing deadly fentanyl in Baltimore City. And we remain involved in the high-intensity drug trafficking area project with our partners at the federal level. It's in its first year. The narcotics unit secured 364 convictions with an impressive conviction rate of 98%. Crime Strategies Unit. This is another unit that was formed under this administration, modeled after the Crime Strategies Unit in Manhattan. The specialized felony unit that was just highlighted are supported by the Crime Strategies Unit, which is a data-driven prosecution unit that assists all trial units by compiling data and centralizing that intelligence to build strong cases against some of the city's most dangerous criminals from the charging stage to conviction. Established under this administration in 2015, based on national best practices, the Crime Strategies Unit developed an arrest alert system which notifies prosecutors when a person of interest is detained. There have been nearly 400 alerts that have gone out in the last year in 2017, which helped my attorneys prioritize their cases. Crime Strategies Unit has also been instrumental in creating the Community Court Watch map. This is an online tool that we just launched that enables the public to track cases impacting their neighborhood. This map is accessible on any smart device and features interactive data that allows users to access details of cases, including court dates, outcomes, and other pertinent information. The map empowers community members to attend court proceedings and juvenile transfer hearings and to submit impact statements. Content is updated weekly by our community liaisons who track these cases for their communities within their respective districts. At any given time, the map is tracking 750 to 1,000 cases. By the end of 2017, the map had already been viewed over 3,200 times. Hopefully, this has been a tool that has been useful. Recognizing that data is a crucial component in our efforts to reduce crime, we are committed to being an active partner in any performance measurement programs led by our mayor and her team. Our community liaisons, which thankfully we have, and we were re-implemented again under this administration. They are keeping their fingers on the pulse of the communities that make up this great city, which is vital in the effectiveness of this administration. My community engagement division, which is comprised of our community liaisons, has proven to be an effective tool in our efforts to break down barriers of distrust among law enforcement in our community and those that we are sworn to serve or protect. In addition to updating the Community Court Watch map, my team of community liaisons interface with other city agencies to help address constituent concerns as part of the Mayor's Violence Reduction Initiative. For example, the liaisons work with the Baltimore Police Department and code enforcement to help communities deal with problem businesses. The liaisons also attend intelligence meetings and briefings with various Baltimore Police Department districts to facilitate information sharing between the community and law enforcement. They attend hundreds of community meetings and events each year, and since September 1st, 2017, the liaisons have attended more than 300 community meetings and 150 community events. Each liaison not only covers a police district, but also has another role assisting a unit in our office. For example, 3 of our liaisons work in the crime strategies unit, and 2 serve as victim witness advocates for the felony trial division during the day. When we talk about witness intimidation, I think it's extremely important that we live in the home of witness intimidation where the stop snitching mentality began. Collectively, we have to do more to better serve our victims and witnesses of crime. I can tell you that due to my office's successful grant application, we're working with partners, including the Baltimore Police Department and the Housing Department, to evaluate policies for identifying, investigating, and prosecuting witness intimidation through the Combating Witness Intimidation Initiative. Baltimore was one of only 3 cities selected nationwide to participate in this initiative. My victim witness unit coordinates with Baltimore Police Department and Housing to relocate witnesses and their families, particularly those related to homicides and shootings. I have to note that the demand for relocation of victims and witnesses has increased significantly over the past few years as a direct result of the increase in violent crime, far outpacing our funding. In the last 2 years, the demand for relocation assistance has increased by 30%. Over the past 5 years, the demand has more than doubled. The increase in homicides in Baltimore City has had the greatest impact on the demand for relocation. The number of witnesses relocated in homicide cases alone have nearly tripled. In addition, the federal victims of crime funds we received have allowed the office to implement my vision of making victim advocates available for all victims of crime in Baltimore City, regardless of the case type. We're excited about the improved services we're now offering, including parking for victims who must come to court, as well as we're renovating, in the process of renovating, victim witness waiting room, which will be debuted this spring in the coming weeks, which is better equipped to service victims and witnesses and survivors through the appearance phase of the process. I want to also inform you all about the immediate charging unit, and this is really critical, and it will come in my final request to this body. The immediate charging unit for juvenile, we zealously prosecute those who have committed violent crimes in our city and serve victims to the best of our ability. My office is also committed to minimizing the collateral impact of the criminal justice system. So, for instance, our juvenile immediate charging unit reduces unnecessary detention for young people. Our immediate charging unit, ASAs review arrest reports for all youth booked at the Juvenile Justice Center, make decisions on 1, whether they're going to charge, and 2, whether to reduce the charge. Reviewing arrest reports in real time means that the ICU, immediate charging unit, is able to reduce unnecessary detention for low-risk youth while ensuring the detention of high-risk, violent youth. The ICU has also increased referrals to pre-booking diversion programs, minimizes the time between arrest and arraignment. The ICU was created in 2003 and has been funded since then by a grant from the Department of Juvenile Services. We were made aware in September of 2017, DJS announced that they were terminating their agreement to fund the ICU effective December 31st, 2017. We successfully negotiated with DJS to secure an additional $100,000 in funding to continue the unit's important work in 2018, but that funding will be exhausted next month. At that time, I will be forced to disband this incredibly important unit within my office, focused exclusively on addressing juvenile crime, unless we receive additional funding to cover the remainder of fiscal year 2018 and all of fiscal year 2019. Again, this will be part of the request and the ask. When it comes to legislative affairs, finally, each year during legislative session, my legislative affairs team and I go down to Annapolis to work with everyone from victim service organizations to elected officials to ensure that the law supports and protects all citizens that we serve. One of our priority pieces of legislation this year was our police powers investigators legislation. And nonetheless, my prosecutors depend on law enforcement officers to carry out court orders once my office has a case. The demands of responding to violence in our city means our police officers and sheriff's deputies are not always able to prioritize warrants associated with a pending case. When witnesses are unavailable, the criminal justice system suffers. As a city, we need to use every resource we have in this crime fight. That's why I am again asking for police powers from my investigators. And for the 5th year, and that's in Annapolis, but for the 5th year, legislative session, I'm prioritizing the Repeat Sexual Predator Prevention Act, which addresses dangerous loopholes that allow serial predators to hide evidence of a serial pattern of sexual assault to the juries. This legislation will improve the likelihood of convicting repeat sexual predators before those predators rape or molest other victims. While these prosecutorial and legislative efforts of my office are just some of the highlights we are focused on, I fully understand and collectively that we have to address crime holistically. It can't just continue to be reactive. We have to be proactive. We need to address the concentration of poverty, drug abuse. We need to take mental health seriously. We need to invest in our young people, which is the #1 priority for my Crime Control and Prevention Division. I know that together, as a city and city officials, we can stem the tide of crime, restore faith in the criminal justice system, and make our communities safer, but we need your help. So, in summary, as crime in the city has skyrocketed, my office's budget and resources available to my prosecutors have not kept pace. We have tried to fill in the gaps where we can. Since 2015, we've increased grant funding by more than 29%. In fiscal year 2018, we received over $6.6 million in grant funds for our office, but these funds are not sustainable, as was pointed out by Councilman Pinkett a while ago, and often limited to specific purposes. We need additional resources from the city in order to continue our fight against crime. I can't stress enough how crucial it is that we find funding to maintain the immediate charging unit for the juvenile division, as well as funds to support the hiring of additional staff. From computer analysts and database administrators to further our work in the crime strategies unit, to law clerks and paralegals and assistant state's attorneys able to tackle our massive and ever-growing caseloads. Due to no small part of the thousands of cases we now must review where the gun trace task force police officers were involved, and dozens of new police officers each day are outfitted with body-worn cameras, resulting in staggering amounts of video footage that my staff must thoroughly review. When you provide my prosecutors with the resources they need, we deliver justice. We have successfully convicted every single public enemy #1 who has been brought to trial since 2015. Collectively, their sentences include 6 life sentences plus 700 years, and overall, we have to ensure that we're not just being reactive, we have to be proactive. And I'm willing and able to collaborate, but we need the resources to be able to do that. So thank you for your time and attention this evening. We look forward to continued collaboration to drive down violent crime in Baltimore City. My team and I are happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Madam State's Attorney. We're going to wait to answer questions.
Okay.
So if you have to leave, just leave a member of your staff behind to answer.
Mr. Chair, I will have to leave, but my team is here
Yep.
to answer any questions.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Vetter, before you come up, just want to point out for the public and for everyone here that we have to understand that this time last year we were in this room and we were talking about this very same topic. And we have to understand that last year was a complete and utter failure. We allowed this city to see the worst violence that it has ever seen in the history of Baltimore City. We are pleased that we are seeing the numbers going the other way so far this year, but let me be clear, basing it off of last year is not enough. If we cannot see the progress that we saw in 2011 and 2014 and begin to beat that, then we're still failing. We also know that this body, this committee, has long said that we have to look at violence through the lens of public health and that we have to approach it as such. So as we move forward tonight, we look forward to hearing about how we're going to tackle those items. So, Mr. Vetter, the floor is yours, sir.
So good evening. My name is Drew Vetter. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. I will quickly go through my slides and then hand it over to Commissioner D'Souza for him to go through his slides. So we just heard from State's Attorney Mosby. Like I said, we'll be hearing from Commissioner D'Souza. I'm going to provide just a brief overview of some of the initiatives that are going on and kind of where we are. Kendra Parlock, my colleague from the Mayor's Office of Sustainable Solutions, is going to talk about how we're tracking the items in the Mayor's Violence Reduction Plan, as well as talk about the Violence Reduction Initiative, which is the daily meetings with the city agencies that you know about. And then you're going to hear from each city agency. We have a lot of content to get through. So I have asked everybody to keep their presentations extraordinarily brief so that we can get to questions. Just wanted to remind everyone that in the Mayor's Violence Reduction Plan that was released in August of 2017, all of the various initiatives were grouped under these broad strategic pillars, which are making Baltimore safe, keeping Baltimore healthy, engaging Baltimore youth, and moving Baltimore forward. Wanted to inform the council and the public that as we're shaping these strategies that you're going to hear about today, there are a number of guiding principles that we keep in mind and that we're striving towards. First, we seek to inform our strategies with data. Second, the mayor has charged us with looking around the country, looking at best practices, and to do what works. And there are a number of things which have proven to work to reduce violence around the country. And we want to be adopting as many of those best practices in Baltimore as we can. We very much believe that the way to attack this problem is through identifying risk and then having an array of interventions around that risk. And when I talk about risk, I mean the most at-risk individuals for violence in the community, the most at-risk geographic locations, but because of a number of factors become places for violence, and the sort of most at-risk groups of individuals as well. Collaboration and communication is absolutely key and essential to everything we do. I think you'll hear a lot today about how all the agencies in the room are working together. It goes beyond just the traditional law enforcement coordination between police and prosecutors, but we've got a multi-agency approach that involves the core service agencies in the city, as well as human services agencies, as well as all of our nonprofit and grassroots partners throughout the city. This plan, we've got to have both immediate action steps as well as longer-term solutions. You have to do both. It's not one or the other. We can't just focus on today. We have to be looking downrange as well. But we do need to make changes right now because, as you said, Councilman, the numbers last year were not where we wanted them to be. And even though we're moving in the right direction, we've got to do things right now to continue to drive that progress. And then lastly, you also alluded to this, we have to have both traditional law enforcement approaches as well as more holistic and public health approaches to this problem. And I think you're going to hear about a number of those today as well. You can't do one or the other. You absolutely have to do both. For additional context, I just wanted to share a few words from a lecture that was given by a researcher from the Harvard Law and Kennedy School at a violence reduction convention hosted by Hopkins earlier this year. And he stated that to reduce violence in urban America, we have to be selective in who, what, and where we focus. We have to be balanced, including both punishment and prevention in our strategies. And we have to be legitimate by building trust and confidence in our efforts. This is just a quick snapshot of where we are, and I realize it's a little bit hard to see, but the chart that you see on the left is homicides and non-fatal shootings going back to the beginning of last year. So you saw kind of a gradual uptick, particularly in the non-fatal shootings, sort of peaking in October, and we have seen progress since the month of October, starting in November, and that's continued through the month of February, which ends today. So again, it's encouraging from a management standpoint. We have to look at these numbers every single day so that we continue to make progress day after day, week after week. Demonstrating the progress that we're making this year is in no way a celebration. It's simply a stock take of where we are, and we'd rather be down so far in 2018 than up. So we're going to continue to try to drive that progress. For my portion of the presentation, I just wanted to highlight a few initiatives and remind the public how each one of those initiatives tie back to a broader strategy for violence reduction. First, we've got strategies that are data-driven and around focused enforcement. We've got violence interruption and prevention strategies. And then a key piece of the strategy is what I'll call excellence at the Baltimore Police Department, hiring, recruitment, modernization, technology, things along those lines. And so there's just a few key initiatives that you've been hearing about that I wanted to provide information on. the Strategic Decision Support Center model that you've heard both Commissioner D'Souza and Mayor Pugh speak about is a strategy that was refined in Los Angeles and was adopted by the city of Chicago in late 2016, early 2017. And there are a lot of components to it, and it gets a little bit confusing. Is it technology? Is it process? Is it predictive policing? What is it? Really, it's a combination of all those different things in a hyper-localized fashion at the district level. At its core, it involves physically constructing a room in the districts, which is underway in our eastern and western police districts, with video monitors and computers and conference tables, workspaces for both officers, district staff, as well as civilian analysts to be brought in to work alongside district officers at the district level. All the various technology that's available feeds into that, and so that involves gunshot detection technology, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which is coming to Baltimore, CCTV camera feeds, mapping software, 911 data, all of those things kind of in a central location available to be used and to direct real-time deployment. This also involves process and analysis. So each day there's a review that happens to review the incidents from the previous 24 hours and to drive deployment and to drive strategy for the following day. This is something that was adopted in Chicago at the beginning of 2017 in the 7th and 11th precincts there, which were two of Chicago's historically most violent. In the 7th precinct on the south side of Chicago, they were able to reduce homicides and shootings by about 45% in 2017. And in the 11th, which is the second district that they went into, they were able to reduce homicides and shootings by about 30%. A number of us have been able to view this program in action in Chicago, and it's clear in speaking with commanders and rank and file officers there that they attribute that success in large part to this strategy. The creator of this strategy is a deputy chief of police with Los Angeles Police named Sean Malinowski. You've heard the mayor mention his name. He helped Chicago in a consulting capacity over the course of 2017. As his engagement was ending there, we had a conversation with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is kind of the grant-making arm of DOJ, about sending him to Baltimore next. So we were able to secure a $150,000 grant from BJA to get Sean and his team members of other policing and research, law enforcement research professionals to assist Baltimore over the next several months. And we're working on identifying funding to keep that engagement going throughout the year, and hopefully replicate this model and replicate the success that Chicago had and that LA has had for some time now, starting in our eastern and western police districts. And it is our hope that this would be a permanent and multi-year strategy where, we're starting with the eastern and western now, but we'll gradually bring in other districts as we go along. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the Violence Reduction Initiative because I think a lot of you have observed that in action, and my colleague Kendra Parlak is going to describe it in more detail. But I just wanted to highlight it, and just if you go back to one of the previous slides, highlight this as our key violence interruption and violence prevention effort. And this is just a snapshot of what we call the central VRI area, as well as some analysis that we did in our office using some mapping software where we took a look at 2017 gun incidents at a block-by-block street segment level, as well as some other environmental factors such as vacant buildings. It's that type of place-based, hyper-local intervention strategy that the administration is using. The police department is using this strategy not just from an enforcement standpoint, but city agencies are also directing their activities here as well. Safe Streets. So you're familiar with the Safe Streets program. This is a program that has been in existence in Baltimore for over 10 years. There are currently 4 sites, and they're the orange sites that you see on the map there. This is an adaptation of the national cure violence model that was also started in Chicago. We're talking a lot about Chicago today. But Baltimore was actually the first city in the United States where cure violence replicated. This strategy, this violence interruption strategy, is now being used in cities and towns throughout the country, and in fact, internationally. It's something that we believe very much in as part of our overall approach. It is a public health approach that treats violence like an infectious disease and something that can be cured. As you know, you're familiar with the program, so I'm not going to describe it too much, but it uses credible messengers from within the community to build relationships with young people in the territories that they're working, to detect and interrupt conflict, and we're hoping to strengthen this aspect of the program, but also to connect individuals with wraparound services and things like that as well. So we intend on expanding this program and investing in this program. We currently have 4 sites in Baltimore City. We have them in Park Heights, Cherry Hill, Sandtown, and McElderry Park. The map you see here is, and the sites are, the borders of the sites are mirror BPD's police posts. And the criteria for an eligible site is any post that has been in the top 25% for gun violence over the preceding 3-year period. And so that's what this map shows. It shows all of the posts that are in the top quartile for gun violence over the last 3 years. We believe that replicating a single site costs around $500,000 annually per site. We are identifying up to $3.5 million roughly, which would give us the ability to add 6 sites to the program. Probably won't all be done at the same time. As a matter of fact, the existing 4 sites, the community-based organizations that run them, all have contracts with the city that expire this June as well. So in addition to renewing the contracts at the existing 4 sites, we intend to add several through an RFP that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And so the way the process works is that the city will put out a request for proposals. Community-based organizations, potential partners, will review the RFP, submit bids, and we'll have an evaluation committee to evaluate the strength of those applications from partner CBOs. And for anyone that doesn't know, Safe Streets is a city program, but community-based organizations, which are independent nonprofits, actually operate the sites and employ the workers. And so, for example, Park Heights Renaissance, the community organization, runs the Park Heights site. Catholic Charities runs the site in Sandtown. Living Classrooms runs the site in McElderry Park. Family Health Centers of Baltimore runs the site in Cherry Hill. So we're going to be looking for additional partners like that who are interested in the program. And like I said, we expect that RFP to hit the streets sometime in the next few weeks. Another one of the violence interruption and prevention programs that will be coming is ROCA. And I know a number of you are familiar with this program as well, but ROCA is a nonprofit organization that's been operating in Massachusetts for the last 30 or so years. And we have here the mission and vision of ROCA. What makes ROCA different is that they use data to identify young people between the ages of 17 and 24 who are truly at the highest risk for violence, and that's either to be a perpetrator or a victim of violence. And similar to Safe Streets, ROCA will be hiring local, they call them youth workers, but they're outreach workers, similar to the Safe Streets Violence Interrupters, who will be going, into the community with the target population they've identified to first, as a first step, build relationships with young people. And these are the people who are not yet ready, willing, able to accept other programming. These are the really disengaged. And so the first step of the model is to build a relationship with that young person. The second phase is to get them into programming, wraparound services, and things like that. And then ultimately, through vocational training, educational training, GED, and actual job placements, teach these young people how to have jobs, get them connected with actual employment, and eventually graduate them from the model. But it's a 4-year-long, very, very intensive model. Where we are right now is we're in a planning stage with ROCA. The intent is to launch this summer. July 1 is the target. The idea is that ROCA will enroll 75 to 100 young people as participants in year 1. ROCA is going to be, they're looking for physical space to locate in Baltimore right now. They're going to be hiring a local executive director. They're going to be hiring all local staff. So all of that work is ongoing right now, as well as lots and lots of meetings with the police department, with parole and probation, with juvenile services, to discuss potential collaboration, to review data, and figure out who this population of young people that the program is going to be working with are. Another key element of the strategy involves the police department getting back to full staffing, to improving and modernizing its recruitment strategies, to attracting higher quality candidates, to attracting more local residents to the department, all very important things. We just displayed a couple graphs. The one on the left shows attrition and hiring by year, going all the way back to 2002. And as the chart demonstrates, we were on a pretty unsustainable trend from 2011 on, where we were continually, year after year, losing more police officers to attrition than we were able to hire. As you can see, in 2015 and 2016, attrition stayed relatively stable, compared to historical trends, contrary to what some people might think, given everything the department went through during that time period. But the hiring really took a hit in those years and created an even larger gap. We're extremely encouraged that in 2017, we were able to hire more police officers than we lost, which was the first time that had happened since 2009. Came close in 2011. But we're encouraged by that. It's too early to say where we're going this year. The pie chart on the right just shows attrition and hiring in 2018 so far. January was a slow month, but February was a much more normal month, and we expect applications to continue to increase and continue to hire as many quality candidates as we can. As you might know, we have an innovation team in the mayor's office. Dan Heimowitz is the director of the mayor's innovation team. He's here with us today in case there are questions about his work. But the innovation team is working exclusively on the issue of police hiring and recruitment. And they have been working hand in hand with the police department for a number of months. They've done a lot of research. They've looked at a lot of data. And now are working towards implementing solutions. One of the early wins in that, and one of the things that helped us achieve success in 2017, was fully automating the hiring process. So background investigations used to be done entirely with paper and mail, snail mail. That process is now entirely online. The city procured a system called ESOF, and that helped shave a significant amount of time off the hiring process, which is really key to boosting hiring numbers, because what we find is that prospective candidates apply to a number of different law enforcement agencies, and really whoever is able to hire them first is where they end up going. So speeding up the process is a key part of this strategy. We're also seeking to modernize. We recently received a $5 million grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies for the adoption of various different types of public safety technology, a lot of which is already in use by the department, which this $5 million will allow us to expand. We're going to be able to add about 55 CCTV cameras to the CityWatch network. So the CityWatch network is about 750 cameras citywide. A project of about 55 cameras will be the biggest expansion that's occurred since 2012. Most of that 750 camera network was built out in earlier parts of the century with Homeland Security dollars, which have significantly diminished over the years. And so the budget for CityWatch now, which is managed by our office, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, is really just a maintenance budget and has not allowed us to significantly expand the network in any way. Any cameras that you've seen come online in the last several years have been mostly due to public-private partnerships where we have someone else chipping in to help pay for the cameras. So, but in terms of like pure expansion projects, this 55 will be the biggest one in a number of years. So we're currently in the process of identifying locations and getting those installed as quickly as possible. Gunshot detection technology. We're going to be able to add about 10 square miles of gunshot detection technology with this grant. And just to give you a sense of the coverage, we've got 2 proposed 5 square mile networks here. The Eastern and Western police districts, which are the kind of the historical crime drivers within the city, are only about 3 square miles each. So 2 5 square mile coverage areas allows you to cover virtually the entire Eastern, the entire Western district, as well as some of the areas around the borders spilling into other districts as well. So we're going to be working to get this project done as quickly as possible as well. Just a reminder about some other technology projects. As you know, the city got funding to finally install mobile computers in all patrol vehicles. So we have about 400 patrol vehicles in the BPD fleet. We're installing these computers sort of district by district. I believe 2 districts are done. Another 2 districts are being done now. They should be installed throughout the entire fleet over the next couple of months. And that's going to have huge benefits in terms of access to information that our officers have directly in the field, eventually field-based reporting, the ability to check databases, to access email, access the network, anything that you would be able to do at a computer in an office, patrol vehicles will now be able to do directly out into the field. A key component of that is also improving the data infrastructure at BPD. So in order to enable that field-based reporting, we need to update the records management system of the BPD, as well as the case management system, which is severely antiquated. The mayor has included resources in the budget in order to be able to complete these projects. The proposed governor's budget at the state level this session includes $2 million for BPD for technology projects, which will give us an ability to do these projects as well. I mentioned the build out of the SDSC rooms earlier, and just wanted to provide an update that virtually the entire sworn police force now has body-worn cameras. And I know that's been a project and been a topic that's been discussed here a number of times. So that represents a big step forward in terms of modernization. So I just wanted to conclude with an update on some of the things that our office has been doing. Mr. Chair, as you mentioned, last time we were here, we didn't have a director of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. Many of the staff had left. So since that time, I assumed this post in August. We've added 6 new experienced staff to the office. We've established a number of regular coordination meetings. One of the key things that we can do is act as a convener of criminal justice partners. And so we've established a number of regular, recurring monthly meetings where we're bringing law enforcement and other stakeholders together to build mutual understanding, break down silos, identify areas for collaboration, and then once we identify those areas, to really monitor progress and drive performance. We're doing this with all of the juvenile justice involved agencies. We're doing regular meetings with the State Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, with a particular emphasis on talking about how we can better collaborate with parole and probation. We've secured and implemented the $5 million grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies that I mentioned. We had a number of grant-funded positions within the office that were vacant that we've now filled. We now have a full-time human trafficking coordinator who is helping to shape the city's human trafficking response. His name is Tom Stack. He's a retired law enforcement professional with a lot of experience in the area. He is co-chairing, along with Councilman Burnett, the Human Trafficking Coordinating Council, which was established by the City Council over the summer. They've now had 2 meetings and are already starting to identify areas for just more activity around the incredibly important and incredibly prevalent issue of human trafficking. We have hired a sexual assault response team coordinator, SART. SART is a collaboration of all of the agencies and advocacy organizations that are involved in the response to sexual assault. So we have someone out of the mayor's office now that is helping to coordinate all of those efforts, where they're actually talking about cases and response to cases, as well as solving problems and working on policy solutions. We've reestablished regular police stat meetings in City Hall in coordination with the Mayor's Office of Sustainable Solutions and the Police Department. So those are happening on a regular basis. We're assisting with outcome measures, performance metrics, and talking about those things on a regular basis. We're working with BPD to help supplement their crime analysis capacity. We've established within MOCJ an Office of Community Safety and Engagement that will be headed by an individual named Tyrone Roper, who I believe is here today. He recently joined the mayor's office from Behavioral Health Systems of Baltimore. Tyrone has a public health background and will be helping us to provide leadership and direction to a number of our violence interruption and prevention programs, to include Safe Streets. Obviously, we're partnering with ROCA, supporting the launch of the SDSCs. We run a visitation center, which is supervised visitation and exchange of custody of children, which is something that was established under grant funding from the federal government a number of years ago. The funding was running out as I assumed this post. We had reapplied for funding to continue that program. We were awarded that funding for another 3 years of the visitation center, and so we're kind of relaunching that effort right now as well. And then we recently secured a state grant to add additional staffing to the department that we're going to use to supplement our ability to do analysis as well as do additional coordination. And Mr. Chair, unless there are any questions now, I think I'll give it to Commissioner D'Souza, and he'll be followed by Kendra Parlock.
Yes, sir. Commissioner. And while we wait for the commissioner to come forward, we have been joined by Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District, member of the committee, and Councilwoman Shannon Sneed from the 13th District, member of the committee.
Yeah, just right.
Mr. Commissioner, please state your name for the record, and officially welcome to the Baltimore City Council for your first hearing as commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilman. Thanks for having me this evening. I'd like to introduce my staff, actually, while they're here, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
So I'll say that the road to our crime reduction strategy and our crime reduction plan for 2018 started in 2017. So 2017 in October and November, we had a 2-day retreat of all patrol commanders. New Psalmist was nice enough to host it for us. While we were there, we talked about the first quarter of 2018 and the goals that we needed to achieve and the direction, what resources we needed to deploy on the streets, what areas specifically, who the drivers of crimes were and who were going to actually go after them. And we also talked about specific deployments, where they would be, whether it was a combination of foot, motorized patrol, whether it was community collaboration, engaging the community in a positive direction. We talked about all these issues in 2017. So part of the fight and part of my reorganizational structure that's contributing to the crime reduction and part of the strategy for 2018 is moving some pieces around. So if you recall last year, or actually the past few years, we had a chief of patrol and then we had one area commander. So the area commander actually was the deputy chief of patrol. He did not have the ability to effectively assist the 9 other districts. So I thought it was a critical need to bring in 2 light colonels to oversee East Side and oversee the West Side. So I'll start by introducing Lieutenant Colonel Garrity, who used to be the Eastern District Commander and used to be the Southeast District Commander, and he oversees the East Side districts. So in addition to those 2 districts, he has the Northern and the Central District. His counterpart over on the West Side is Lieutenant Colonel Steve Ward, who was the commander at once in the Eastern District and the commander in the Southern District just most recently. And he has a great nexus and a great understanding of the West Side, which you know has always been probably more the problematic side of the city. So Lieutenant Colonel Steve Ward has 5 districts under his command. What's new to the crime fight also is, you guys can have a seat, please, thanks. What's new to the crime fight is that council knows that there's only 9 districts. There is a need in the very near future to really assess that and to see what that looks like. When I was the commander of the Northeast District, we had an area of the city that was really plagued with a lot of robberies. It was the Frankfurt Community Association. Our district was not able to effectively deploy in a rapid manner to the far eastern part of the district. What we did was we developed what was called a satellite unit, and we had the officers directly respond from that satellite location and deployed in the Frankfurt Association. So I used the data and I used the successes behind that and created what I call is the 10th district. The 10th district is a motorized district where we have a major who's in charge of that, and that's Major Rob Jackson, the former major of the Southwest District, who, in my opinion, is very tactically sound and really understands crime deployment. So under his command and under his watch, he has a lieutenant. He's going to soon have 2 crime analysts. The 10th district, the mobile 10th district, is going to be staffed. They're going to run about 16 to 18 hours of the day. I'm happy to say that all the areas where Major Rob Jackson has deployed the 10th district since inception about 8-9 days ago, we have not seen any violence, homicides, or shootings. So it's been very effective. Who's attached to him is the officers that come out on foot before they go to their districts. They spend 90 days on foot. So they're assigned to Major Rob Jackson. He strategically deploys them as needed. He strategically deploys the truck as needed. In addition to his resources, we created in 2017 what we call a mobile metro unit. The mobile metro unit, thank you, have a seat, Rob. The mobile metro unit basically is assigned to the major corridors in Baltimore City. So all of last year in 2017, 53% of the homicides and non-fatal shootings that we experienced were off of major corridors. So there was a need to address that. We have not had a robust unit to be motorized on some of our major corridors throughout the city. We know what those major corridors are. The mobile metro unit has deployed to those areas, And I have to say that successfully, as they've been deployed in those units, we have not had any violence in those areas. So there's a need for us to find a sustainable way. I should have mentioned first, the Deputy Commissioner is Andre Bonaparte. He's standing up right now. Thanks, Andre. Next is Michelle Wurzberger. Michelle Wurzberger is the chief of the Consent Decree Implementation Unit. Thanks, Michelle.
I think we all know Michelle just a little bit here on the City Council.
Right. Next is, Chief Steve Odell, Management Service. And I'm happy to say that this next gentleman, he is back. He is overseeing the Tactical Special Operations Division. If you do not know, Council and Mr. Chair and Chairpersons, that Rob Smith and I started the Police Academy the very same day, December 27th, 1988. We were partners in the Police Academy. He actually was the squad leader, the leader of our Academy class 88-5. He actually left and retired from the police department and came back because he felt a need to really come back and help the city. He was not satisfied with the reports that we have seen in 2017 with 43 murders. He wanted to come back immediately, and he is here now as a full colonel. Thank you, Smitty. Next to far end is Lieutenant Colonel Donnie Bauer. He does valuable work. We all know what he does. He oversees all the homicide investigations. He is doing a critical piece in terms of intel sharing. I'll get to that in just 1 second. And then we have Chief of Staff. We all know Jim Gillis. And last but not least, new to the team is the Chief of Patrol, Colonel Perry Stansfield. Colonel Perry Stansfield used to be a member of the police department, retired 8-9 years ago. Am I correct? 8-9 years ago? 7 years ago. When Colonel Stansfield left the police department, he still remained in public safety. Colonel Stansfield spent the last couple of years working with the Downtown Partnership, so he has not missed a beat. He understands the urgency, and he understands how critical it is to loop in stakeholders, particularly businesses and community, as we move forward. I'm sorry, Chief Russell is in the back. I'm sorry, Mel. And Chief Russell is 36, 37-year member of the police, 38, sorry. And Chief Russell oversees the youth and the community collaboration division. So thank you very much. So we recently had a 2.5-day session. I took the commanders offline. We went right downtown. We had a retreat for 2.5 days. Day one was the light colonels and above. Monday and Tuesday was the captains and above. And basically, we came into the room and says, how and what are we going to do in 2018? And we felt it was critical. We felt it was critical for us to be accountable in 2018. And what does that mean? And for us to redefine our missions and our vision for the crime fight and for Baltimore in 2018. These are my 7 guiding pillars that we're going to use 2018. And we're going to use these pillars from now until 2025. It's critical for us to have that second column, which is consent decree. And yeah, the consent decree may or may not be in 7 years, but it is mission critical for us just to make sure that we don't miss a beat, and that we're in policy, and that we meet the marks and all the benchmarks. And I'll get into that in a second. But if you look at pillar number 1, is crime reduction. That's our plan, that's our strategy. I'm happy to say at this point with homicides, we're minus 24%. Our non-fatal shootings, we're down 48%. Just about every single major category, we are down. The only exception where we have some increases, unfortunately, is the domestic-related incidents, robberies, and some of the other subcategories in that. That just shows us a need to really reach out and engage and find a more holistic approach in how we deal with our domestic victims. Third pillar is internal identity. I'll get to that in just a second. The next pillar is officer safety and wellness, procedural justice, truth and transparency, trust and transparency. And the last pillar is our youth and community. And I don't think that we paid attention enough to our youth in the city. I think it's critical for us to engage them. If you go back and look at some of the data that the Washington posted in 2015 and in 2016, where we unfortunately talk about police officer shootings and youth, the youth were the highest group of young men that was associated with that. So that's something for us to work on and something for us to build on. Our idea is not to arrest, is to find other alternatives, to work with Mel Russell's shop. And our goal, to be quite frankly, at the end of the day, is to make them productive young men and young women in the community, and eventually guide them into a direction where they can be police officers. Next slide. That's our homicide, column 1, the districts themselves. Where we currently are is the far right, and where they were all of 2017 is exactly in the middle. This clicker doesn't work too well. So you see which districts, 2018, where we are. Next slide is the non-fatal shootings and where we are currently. Although we are down, I'm happy at the direction where we're going. It's going to be a long 2018, but the direction I am encouraged as we speak here today. So I'll just talk about consent decree. It's critical for us in our crime fight. We identified what needs to be done based on the DOJ, based on our monitor, based on the federal judge. Our first year plan, our first year implementation plan is prisoner transport, misconduct, use of force, and training. Next pillar is our internal identity. And when we met the other day and we talked about our internal identity, we literally talked about what the BPD is going to look like. We literally talked about what our mission should be. We talked about what our vision should be. We actually even talked about branding and like what brand is the Baltimore Police Department. We had different breakout groups. Some groups talked about missions and values, another group talked about crime reduction. But what was critical was a group that talked about branding. There was a young captain that stood up, and she was the spokesperson for the branding group. And in the branding group, she had a host of topics and a host of names and a host of ideas that she talked about. But what I thought was really critical that she said, and she did a wonderful job in her presentation, but she said, when I asked her, I said, who are we? What is BPD? And she said, we are BPD. And if we had to come up with a brand, we should be BPD. And I said, well, Captain, kind of talk about that a little bit. And she simply said that BPD is building professionals to deliver. And I think that was really a home run when she said that, because in 2018 and moving forward 7 years from now, we need to be an organization that's completely professional in everything that we do, from the crime fight to how we engage the community, to the consent decree, to how we deal with youth on a regular basis, and how we deliver our policy. Everything has to be on a professional level. We talked about accountability. We talked about the critical need for officer safety and officer wellness. We realized that for the crime fight this year that we need officers in uniform deployed on the streets. We realized that it was a challenge with officers on light duty, on medical, too many departmental accidents in the past. And one thing that we don't talk about a lot is the lack of incentive programs, of fitness incentive programs for our police officers. We need them healthy for the crime fight. Procedural justice speaks for itself. I'm a strong advocate for that. I don't see Colonel Jackson here, but this is something that 2018, this is what BPD is going to be all about. This is one of the touch points, one of the pain points that we've seen in the last years, especially with the GTTF. And we're going to be a constitutional and impartial policing department. We're going to practice implicit biases. We're going to have respect. We're going to be legitimate, and we're going to practice fairness. Trust and transparency. This was a difficult conversation that we had when we talked about the last 2.5 days, that unfortunately we felt as though we were a broken agency. Lacked faith. A lot of things that we did were secretive. We talked about the thin blue line. In that thin blue line, we talked about what specifically, what does that mean? Like, does an officer talk about something that he or she may have seen in the past and how critical it is for them to intercede? So I'm creating a new policy. This new policy is going to be strictly removed. This piece is going to be strictly removed from the use of force policy. It's going to be duty to intercede. And we're actually sending a team of commanders to New Orleans over the next couple of days to talk about duty to intercede, and we're going to talk about the duty to de-escalate. Youth and community, that's Major Russell's primary focus is going to be dealing with youth. We all know that we have a challenge with a lot of youth in the downtown area in certain parts of the city. Again, it's not our vision, it's not our plan to arrest. It's our plan to find programs for them to be healthy. It's our plan to invest in them. So that's what one of the challenges that we need to overcome. And I'm really happy to say that we're not going to be an agency that has one-offs. We're not going to be an agency that does coffee with a cop and think that's adequate. We're not going to be an agency to do movie night and think it's acceptable or just a one-off, which is a great program. Yeah, we do the basketball league where we bring in 500 kids each summer, and it's great. Do we go back and look and invest or evaluate the effectiveness of those programs? So I'm happy to say that we're going to be one of the first agencies in the country that's actually going to build out an institute for community police relations. And in that, I think that's going to hold a great value in our crime reduction. I think it's going to show young men and young women in the entire city of Baltimore that we are a transparent agency. It's going to show young men and young women that our intentions is not to arrest. It's going to show them that we have programs available for them, which is not just one day or one weekend. And we're going to take the time to listen to them. And I think that in the past that we all know that our young men and young women in the city, they have a voice. And with this Institute for Community Police Relations, we're going to elevate that voice. We're going to listen to their needs. And I'll close by saying that I did a listening tour last summer before school was out, and Chief Ham was kind enough to allow me to come into their schools. And in the listening tour, I based it basically on 3 questions. Question number 1 was, what is it that you need from the Baltimore City Police Department? Question number 2 was, describe the relationships with the police in your community and you. And question number 3 was, what specific program is it that you need that you think will help bridge the gap between police and community? And I'll tell you that things that I heard, and me being a 30-year member of this police department, things that I heard over those sessions, and when I talk about those sessions, it was 3 middle schools, it was 3 high schools, and it was 3 colleges that I visited. One of the colleges that I did visit was Howard University. But some of the things that was mentioned in that listening tour is things that we immediately have to address in Baltimore City. And I think that Institute for Community Police Relationships is really going to address it. And when we address that, I think we'll be addressing the crime at the same time. So I'm here to take specific questions with crime data if you need it. We're going to have a crime plan this year. We spent the last 2.5 days, like I said, working on a mission and vision. Our crime plan is going to be authored over the next several weeks. Deputy Commissioner Bonaparte put together a team of captains to develop that plan. And in that plan, it's going to be very specific. It's going to talk about what it looks like each quarter. It's going to talk about specific deployments on the streets. It's going to talk about how we operate in the Strategic Decision Support Center. It's going to talk about the VRI and what we need to do. It's going to talk about crime reduction as a whole. It's going to talk about the predictive policing model. And it's going to talk about all the special initiatives that we will participate in the entire 2018. Mr. Chair, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them at this time.
Colleagues, do we have questions for the commissioner? I know he actually has to leave. He has another event. Questions for the commissioner? Well, Mr. Commissioner, you're not getting off that easy. I'll start. Just a few things that I would like to touch on. So, we know that you just got here, so we weren't expecting you in particular to come with a plan in hand today. In particular, you talked about the instituting the community police relationship. I think there will be the ICPR.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So, you know that through the consent decree, we have the Citizens Oversight Task Force, and actually this body passed a ordinance that will create a public safety commission, oversight commission, that the president and I will be working on. It will be great for us to make sure that we partner all those organizations together to make sure that the plans and the ideas that are coming, especially out of the consent decree from the COTF, will be met. Can you commit to doing that, to making sure that we get those folks together?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And secondly, actually, Vice Chair, would you like to ask a question? Sure. Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. This is not something you touched on, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. It may seem like a superficial concern to some.
Yes, sir.
But I regard war as an intrinsically violent endeavor, and so there's a cognitive dissonance to me to say that we're going to endeavor to reduce violence in the city, but meanwhile maintain a war room. And I've heard from many that there is, it's kind of disturbing that we have a war room. I'm wondering if that's something that you might change. Just call it something different,
Yes,
not
sir.
a war room.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that something you could do?
Councilman, I agree with you 100%. I know we had conversations in the past. Not only will we change the name from the War Room, but we also took your advice, and we no longer call the citywide initiative Blitz. I understand how that might
that too.
sound. Yeah, it's we changed the name, and we struck that from our language.
I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. I'm going to ask one other thing. And it also has to do with kind of community perception. I know, and again, this might seem like a small thing, but I saw your stats for homicide and non-fatal shootings. You know, on kind of like the scale here, right? We have like homicide, non-fatal shootings, discharging of a firearm, and then unfounded, right? So I get people in my district who know that guns were just fired in front of their house, and so they report it as, you know, there was just a shooting on my block, but Northeast District comes out and they respond to it and they see it. They don't see a body. There's not a wound in flesh, so they're like, no shooting occurred. And what is reported then, what's recorded, is unfounded. And people see that language of unfounded as like, what are you telling me, that I don't know what I just heard and what just happened in front of my house? You're doubting the validity of that? Unfounded, really? Because the average person doesn't think there was just shooting versus a shooting, and doesn't report it as somebody just discharged a firearm on my street. So it's never recorded as illegal discharging of a firearm, is my understanding. I think that people would be really thankful to see a little bit more precision in the way these things get recorded, so that they know that when they report that guns just went off in their neighborhood, that's marked.
Councilman, again, you are 100% accurate in what you're saying. Deputy Commissioner Bonaparte, in our conference call yesterday, shared some information, or not really shared, but directed some of the commanders about discharging, because discharging, like you say, is what I call a near miss. When you talk about the homicides and non-fatal shootings that we track on a regular basis, if you actually take a discharging call and overlay it on that same map, it's almost identical. So case in point, one of the incidents that we had last night, one of the districts did not do their due diligence in tracking and monitoring the discharging calls, which was what we call in policing a clue. So Deputy Commissioner Bonaparte is mandating that, number one, we get a daily discharging call on a regular basis in the mornings, so we have a robust conversation with all the district commanders, and that number two is that based on these discharging calls in some areas, or just about all areas, that patrol officers know that they need and the commanders know that they need to do their due diligence and deploy to those areas, because again, it's a near miss. It's a near miss. The other piece of it, sir, is that Drew hit on it just a little bit, but Shot Spotters is going to be part of the Strategic Decision Support Center that's coming. And Shot Spotter, we're in the process of building a framework out for it now. We went through a tutorial, we went through a lecture from the experts from ShotSpotter, and what was interesting to me that I found out, if there was any data that I took away from that, is that when there is a discharging call, that 20%, only 20% of residents actually call that in, and that if you and I were in a close area, close proximity at home, and heard a discharging calls, your interpretation of where you may have heard that shot is different than mine. So with technology coming, that's really going to help us determine, like, literally where those discharging calls or where that shot came from.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. So that means, I mean, just to put a fine point on it, when somebody calls, and this happens in other kind of 311 contexts, right? I get a call, from somebody that says, I made a complaint about parking, and what they were reporting was that somebody parked their, a neighbor parked a car on a lawn. Well, that's not a DOT parking issue. That's a housing code enforcement issue, and the case gets closed because DOT said that's not a DOT issue, right? It's a similar case, right? It gets called in as shooting, but then doesn't get treated like discharging a firearm. Does this, we're going to be more particular about this when somebody calls in and says there was a shooting. If, in fact, it turns out it was just an illegal discharging of a firearm, that's going to get recorded and addressed properly rather than just unfounded.
Well, when we say unfounded, that's the title of a police report that requires a complaint number in order for us to actually track it. So what it does for us, it puts a mechanism in place that we know that the police officer responded there, and the police officer is mandated and required to get out of his or her car and do an area canvass. And we hope to find shell cases, again, because that is a near miss. So the actual report would not be labeled a shooting, but it would be labeled a discharging call if there's evidence of that.
Only if there's evidence of it. Only if there's physical evidence. Because again, I got some constituents where they know that somebody just discharged a firearm right in front of their house, and then when they look back at the public log, the public records, they don't see discharging a firearm. They heard it, they know what just happened, and because a police officer didn't happen to find a shell casing, it's recorded in such a way that leads them to believe they're not being believed.
We have to do a better job of letting the community know that we're actually responding, we're actually drawing a complaint number, and the officers are actually writing a police report. Whether they find shell cases or not, that's included in the report. If they don't, they still have to author a report saying that they responded, any information that they glean on the scene, and what actions they took. So it's being recorded for us because we know the value behind that. Unfortunately, we know that a discharging call is a near miss. The data that we collect, that I literally see and the team literally sees, discharging is based on a lot of the unfounded calls that we get, and we overlay them on maps. It helps us guide our deployment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just, Mr. Commissioner, if I'm correct, the actual unfounded part is a part of the UCR that's required. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Thank you. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I was glad to hear at your confirmation hearing, I asked you about the war on drugs, and you thought that it is a public health crisis.
Yes, sir.
That is, I think, something that is shared broadly on this council, the general sentiment is that it has been a catastrophic public policy failure. It has targeted communities of color. It has cost millions and probably billions of dollars incarcerating people who are sick and have an addiction. And frankly, it has distracted from our needed focus on violence. And so I wanted to push a little further on that point. New York City, there's a councilman there that just introduced some legislation to essentially deputize citizens to be able to deliver naloxone. I know that some officers here already do that. Would you support that? Would you also support potentially safe injection sites? We're not there yet. But I'm just curious, when you say that we in the police department need to start treating drug addiction like a public health issue, what does that actually mean to you?
Well, sir, I'll start with the last part about the Narcan. Yes, I agree that we should arm the community with that. If you take a look at the 27 data, and this is something that we don't talk about, and this is really alarming for Baltimore City. We had over 800 fatal overdoses that we don't talk about on a regular basis.
Yep.
We had over 7,000 non-fatal overdoses. And if we did not have the Narcan, with those over 6,000 or 7,000 non-fatals, that 800 number probably would be in the thousands somewhere. So I do support arming the community with Narcan with proper training. And I know the fire chief, he probably would agree to some degree with me about that, because the amount of calls for service that not just the police department responds to, but every time I listen out my window or driving down the street, hearing one of the chief's vehicles driving down the street, the first thing, unfortunately, that comes to my mind is an overdose somewhere. So that is critical. Is narcotics, marijuana, is prescription pills. Is it a crime versus a health epidemic? I would agree that it is a health epidemic. However, I would strongly say that those that are introducing it to communities and introducing it to young men and young women, because we have seen young kids, 11 and 12 years old, different parts of the city overdosing, seeing them on the streets in a state of mind where it's not healthy, and you can take a look at them and you know that they're going through crisis, and you know they're overdosing. I have a strong stance on those individuals that sell it in the community because of the violence that's associated with it. But to the degree of it being a health epidemic, I agree with you, sir. It is, and it's something that we have to work on. I am proud to say that our police department is probably one of, and again, I have to figure the numbers out. There's only 13% of the police agencies in the country that self-initiate diversionary programs. So we have a self-initiated diversionary program. I think I talked to you about it a little bit, but it's in the Central District. It's LEAD, and it's law enforcement assisted diversion, and it is for low-level narcotic violations. It is for prostitution. There are strict requirements that go within it. Of course, the person cannot have a felony. The person could not have been arrested in the past 10 years for felony. It's really strict requirements, but it's a diversion program, and it offers them help. And the other thing that's really just as critical as offering them help and a direction to go, but is building a relationship with the police officer and the person that's in crisis.
So what would you like to see done differently within your department as it relates to how we're combating drug use and drug abuse?
Well, I think, sir, that we're starting off, the mayor has this initiative with the VRI, and every single day, all the city agencies are present. Who's present in the room is the health department. They talk about the needle exchange program, and they talk about where they deploy, and the things that the health department says on those daily meetings really is heartwarming, because the folks that they interact with on a regular basis is something that we need. I wish we could have more wagons like that deployed across the city. But I think that we need to be really creative on how we treat addiction. I think that that we need to arm our police officers with just more than just Narcan. We just need to arm them with information on how they can provide and deliver help for someone that's under the influence or someone that's in crisis with narcotics.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had two brief questions.
Yes, sir.
For Commissioner D'Souza. So the first, and I appreciate the efforts that BPD is making. I mean, clearly crime is going down. And so I know it's still early, but when I looked at the statistics that you showed, specifically related to homicides for Central District, it looks like we're ahead of last year's pace. And so I just wanted to, hear, based upon the, strategies that you've talked about, how would you and your team, address seeing that spike?
Specific to Central or just
specific to
Central
because everything
District
else is going down.
During our retreat, we had a nice little healthy conversation with the Central District Commander, trying very hard. I know that there are problematic areas on or about or near the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor. They recently had their last shooting right off 2-3 blocks off Pennsylvania Avenue. They had one off of Division Street maybe a month before that. That had no direct nexus to the Central itself, but we just need to continue to provide resources to Central and other districts. To predictive policing analysis is coming. It can't come quick enough.
Okay.
And when it comes quick enough, we're not just going to try to limit it to 2 districts. It's our goal to get this piece of analysis in so we can take a look at all 9 districts. But the mayor of the Central, he's very much aware of his issues. He knows that Pennsylvania Avenue, unfortunately, is driving a lot of his crime. We're offering him resources. In fact, Major Rob Jackson actually deployed the 10th district to his district the past couple of days, and it's been very effective. We know that, and we realize that we wish we can have more trucks, and maybe that's something we can talk about at a later time. But we're trying everything possible to get ahead of it. Just to heal. We know that the breakdown of the issues along the Pennsylvania Avenue, we know that Penn St. Lawrence is probably one of the primary heroin shops in the city. And we know that if you go up to Penn North, that's probably one of the primary locations for prescription pills. So there's a balance that we try and figure out. We know that we need to deploy heavy in the mornings on Pennsylvania Avenue. We know that we need to provide a steady police presence at Penn St. North towards the later part of the afternoon and into the evening. It's a challenge, but we're all embracing it, and we'll just make sure that we send resources as needed.
Okay, thank you. That was the type of response I was looking for, so
Yes,
I
sir.
appreciate that. My second question was based upon something that Madam State's Attorney said in reference to public enemy number ones and us having 100% conviction rate. And I never thought about it this way, but I'm assuming that somebody doesn't become a public enemy number one overnight. That it is a process of crime or a life of crime. That
Yes.
gets you. So does the police department and the state's attorney's office, do you ever do an analysis of where we could have gotten this guy or girl before they got to being did we miss them somewhere? Were they in our system? And could we have done better, and so that this individual would have never gotten to this level of being public enemy? Do we ever do that type of analysis?
Yes, sir. We assess our drivers of crime. We assess our trigger pullers every single day. We're constantly looking at intel. Unfortunately, I won't say the name here, but we're very much well aware of an individual that was just released today who's going to be very problematic for the east side of Baltimore. But we assess and we use algorithms to kind of figure out who the trigger pullers are, and we list them from literally number 1 all the way to 6,200. And it's based on their past. It's based on whether or not they were a victim, certain handgun violations. We see that in the arrests that we make And even in the crime analysis, the violent crime analysis report that comes out after an unfortunate non-fatal shooting or homicide, we look at their priors, and it's sad. It's sad because we see an average of 11 to 14 prior arrests. We're seeing an average of 3 or 4 handgun violations in the past. We're seeing at least 2 or 3 robberies in the past. So it's tough to try and figure out all 6,200. We prioritize them. All the district commanders know who their top 100 is in the districts. I'm very much well aware of who public enemy number 1 was. He actually did a triple shooting in the 4x4 a couple of years ago. So I'm very much familiar with the process and how we go about. Can it be better? Absolutely. The piece that's missing in it is a piece that I hope to build on in 2018, and that's getting input from the community. Because the community knows, they know who are problematic in their areas where they live. And it's critical for us to build that trust, build those relationships. And once we build the trust and relationships, we're opening up the doors for conversation from the community where they can trust us in providing information and how they have input in saying who's more problematic, if that makes sense.
No, thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
I'm thrilled to be working with you.
Yes, sir.
I had a quick question about the Central. As you're aware, the entire footprint of the Central is in the 7th District, and Councilman
Yes, sir.
Pinkett's and in the 11th District. With respect to 3 specific locations, Lexington Market, the Upton Metro location, which is Pennsylvania and Lawrence, and Penn North, which is in the 7th, have we seen any increase in resources deployed by MTA? Please.
Thank you, Councilman. I can't really speak for MTA. I can tell you that I do spend a significant amount of time on Pennsylvania Avenue corridor. I actually adopted the Penn Mart, which is at Pensy and Lawrence. The times that I go there, I do see a visible police presence from MTA. I do get a chance to go up, and the mayor has her corner, or her store is the A&M store, which is at Pensy and North, which is even just as challenging. That's just a big hub there. I do see MTA there. I'm not sure what their resources look like, but we know it's a city street. We know that it's our responsibility, not just equally, but more. The 10th District has been there. We will continue to deploy in that area. That is a challenge. Same thing with Lexington Market. Lexington Market is a place that the Central District has a permanent 2 or 3 foot officers in that area. So we know where the areas are. The challenge, Councilman, is that trying to sustain our presence there. The direction in 2018 is not to chase the violence. Is to keep a footprint in the areas that we know are problematic, and we can't wait for the predictive policing analysis to come in the door so it can tell us where to go, and it's going to tell us how long we need to be there. And when our officers are there, they're not just standing there like scarecrows. We're giving them a mission when they're there. We're telling them to engage the community in a positive way. We're telling them to go in and out some of the businesses. And then if there is a potential suspect there, we're telling them how to address them and how to have conversation with them in a constitutional manner.
Really appreciate you taking ownership of what BPD's responsibility is and all of that. And, hopefully you are able to get some supplemental resources from MTA
Yes, sir.
Police in those locations because of how challenging all 3 of those locations
Yes,
are.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Last 2 questions for you. You know that this is a big item for me and something that we've talked about at length. Actually, you were the representative for the department at the hearing before. You know that I believe that with the staffing levels that we have in the police department and the amount of calls for service given to patrol each and every day, in particular in the Northeast District, that I think that it's time for BPD to look at how they respond to low priority calls. You were here when in 2013 where we announced the Cop Logic system that I helped bring to BPD so that we can take reports online for minor crimes, and we also have the TRU. What I believe is that we should push all of those calls to those things so that right now I often say that our patrol officers aren't patrolling. They're just call takers because that's all they have time to do.
That's right.
What is your stance now that you're commissioner on how we're going to move to that so that we can actually have patrol officers out there interacting with people and actually having building relationships with people instead of only when they're on call?
That's right. Mr. Chair, I agree with you. I am a big advocate. I'm a big fan for telephone reporting. We've always had it in the Baltimore City Police Department. I do agree that there are low priority calls that we can take online. You know very much how we did it in the Northeast District. It was very successful. We were challenged with our officers going call to call to call to call to call. I do agree if it's non-priority, if it's anything that does not have a suspect nexus to it, that we take those calls online, and we're making progress in doing that. I would say the only caveat to that is that if a caller calls and wishes to speak to a police officer, that we need to have a conversation so we can build those relationships. I'm not saying necessarily it has to be right then and there, but I'm saying that there should be at least a 24-hour follow-up with that person making that call. So whether it's when the incident occurred and they want to take a report online or via telephone or within the next 24 hours, there should be some type of human interaction.
Thank you, and thank you, sir. And the last one is Councilman Cohen touched on it a little bit, and I know Mr. Vedder will get to him about it more. Remember, we used to have programs specifically around juvenile diversion, and in our conversations and hearing you talk about not wanting to arrest young people, especially when we're talking about, we used to have the juvenile robbery diversion program and things like that. Can you talk about how you want to expand on those kind of programs and build those partnerships so that we are not creating another system of young people in the city?
Well, a couple of things, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the ROCA, but the ROCA really kind of focuses on a certain age group. I think it's 17 to 23. That's a great intervention program. Another thing that I'm going to introduce, and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and I think I touched about it lightly when I was talking about Mel Russell, is that we're actually creating a youth division. It's going to be part of the community division, but we're actually creating a youth division. And I don't think that we did our due diligence in how we invest and how we've been investing in our young folk in the community. There's some successful programs that I've been taking a look at. You know some of them. I've been looking at some of the best practices on how we engage our young folk. There are, quite frankly, some great intervention programs out there that I plan to roll out with Mel Russell when we get officers in place to do it. But basically, it's an intervention program surrounding robberies. And we realize that there are, unfortunately, different robbery crews in the city. And we do realize that a lot of them are young folk who succumb to peer pressure. And it is not our interest whatsoever to lock or arrest them up. We need to identify who the ringleader is, and all the young men and young women who potentially may be in that group who may succumb to peer pressure, is that we provide them some type of intervention before they go radioactive. So it's programs like that. I have a bunch that I'm still looking at, but I'm looking at best practices, and I truly believe that the Institute for Community Police Relationship is really going to bode well for us with that.
Thank you. And before you leave, Councilman Sneed has the last questions for you.
Congratulations again.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I'm just curious because when we're talking about the different youth and trying to grab them beforehand, and so I'm wondering, the Mayor's Office of Employment Development has the YO program, and so those are some students or kids that are right on the brink as well.
That's right.
So I'm wondering if if they can be a part of Mel Russell's program where they're already right there on the brink and they could be a part of,
ma'am.
something positive. And I mean, that's just something put in play right there. So I just had a comment, not a
Yes,
question.
thank you, Councilwoman. And I'll just say also, in addition to that, is that when we talk about the VRI and when we're upstairs on the 7th floor each day, Rex and Parks are present. And I hope she's not in here. I'm afraid to turn around, but there's a young lady that works with youth, and the engagement that she does What she reports out each and every day with youth is really fascinating. I think she said early this morning it was 9,000 youth that came into contact with a program that she hires. So the work that they do and the work that Rex and Parks does on the weekends in the VRI zones is really phenomenal. And we hope that we can just build that out in different parts of the city. But ma'am, I will take your advice and work with that program specifically.
Thank you. Actually, Councilman Dorsey has
Sorry,
one more
man.
question.
Yes, sir.
I know you got to go. I just got to come back to this point that Councilman Scott was talking about, because this is something you and I have discussed.
Yes, sir.
Has been discussed in here half a dozen times just in the last year. This like reporting for, extreme low priority.
Yes, sir.
Responses. I just really want to dispel any myth about this, right?
Yes, sir.
It's not a good use of officer resources to send people out right then and there because it's such a low priority. You're not going to do it. But let's not act like, who we fooling to think that that's like building community relations to send somebody out saying within 24 hours. There is not one person in my district that gives a damn about a response 24 hours later, and none of them wants to be inconvenienced by having to wait around for an officer 24 hours later for some window. Like, we just need to dispel this myth and be real clear that what you need from a body that can't instate any policy is the political cover to say, we're just not going to respond to these calls. They need to be taken over the phone or over online. We just need to do away with this meaningless practice of showing up for things that we have a less than 1% rate of closure. Nobody is coming out 24 hours later to a larceny from auto call because I left my car doors unlocked again, which I've done like 5 times in the last year, and closing this case because an officer, met somebody's interest in showing up face to face. We really just need to dispel any myth around this and just say this is complete waste of resources that I also have to, at the same time, have to hear day in and day out we don't have enough of. I just want to be really clear about that.
Yes, sir. And again, I would just say this, sir, and I would just push back respectfully on that. And my pushback would be is that I don't want my officers to lose out on an opportunity to build a relationship. And I think that if someone calls for a low-level call and we cannot get to them right then and there, in our conversations with them, that we tell them they can either call back or we'll come back and visit them in 24 hours, I think is realistic. I think that we owe that. I think we owe that to the community. They're taxpayers. I think we owe them the fact that for them to see a police officer, because, sir, and I say this respectfully, is that we don't know if they're going to share any information beyond that larceny from auto call or that low priority call, and I'm not willing to risk the opportunity to build those relationships. And I say that very respectfully, sir.
I guess we disagree. Is the crime plan going to be disseminated down to a
Yes, sir.
district level in
Yes,
a
sir.
way that is going to be shared, that my communities can?
The overall plan, yes. If there's anything that's really specific in dates and times and what units are going to be going to certain places, we could. I'm not going to share that information, but overall plan and overall vision, yes, sir.
And one last thing. When can we expect that?
We're hoping to get that out probably with 45 or 50.
days.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're working hard on that, sir.
And the last thing is, if you go up Charles Street at rush hour today, tomorrow, the next day, the buses that need to run up there in the transit-only lane are going to be impeded through rush hour every single day by cars parked in the bus lane that we have designated for them and in the bus stops. And this is a problem all over the city. And DOT, it would seem, really needs some help
Yes,
in
sir.
being able to address this, and there are a lot of people that
Yes, sir.
say that that's actually a good use of police resources to do parking and other traffic enforcement stuff. And I know that a lot of people in my district are sick of not seeing any traffic enforcement in their
Yes, sir.
district. But people got to be able to get where they need to go, and especially with 30% of households in the city lacking access to a car, we really need to do something better for bus riders. Can we get better police assistance on that?
Yes, sir. We'll improve on that, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and I can attest that the councilman does leave his door open very frequently in the garage. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, council.
Who's next? Ma'am, please state your name for the record.
Yes, good evening. Hello, I'm Kendra Parlock. I'm Director, Mayor's Office of Sustainable Solutions. I'm going to flip through the slides here. Hello, I'm Kendra Parlock, Director, Mayor's Office of Sustainable Solutions. MOSS is responsible for building solutions to advance the strategic priorities of the mayor. We're a team of 5 that's formed over the past 6 months. And our key activities are performance management, performance measurement, to include measuring performance of the mayor's violence reduction plan, leading city stat smart meetings, and creating and utilizing visualizations and tools for data analysis. So what we're charged with doing is measuring the performance of the mayor's violence reduction plan. Violence reduction is the overarching goal here. Year to date, we are looking at a 45% reduction in homicides and non-fatal shootings, and that's what we're using as the overall goal. The mayor's violence reduction plan is multi-pronged approach, is cross-cutting, and is based on evidence that violence reduction is not just policing. So there are 4 objective areas. That's making Baltimore safe, which is around strengthening BPD and increasing community engagement. And I'll go through the measures associated with these. Keeping Baltimore healthy, which is focused on expanding resources and opportunities for people in need. Engaging Baltimore's youth, focused on providing additional paths for achievement for Baltimore's youth, and moving Baltimore forward by increasing jobs and providing opportunities. So the performance measurement development for the mayor's plan has begun with the high-level measures that I'll highlight. And these measures that we're starting with are measures that are things that are reported on by the agencies currently in scorecard, with some additional ones outlined, and I'll highlight those as we go through the goal areas. So under making Baltimore safe, there are 61 different initiatives that are tracked under making Baltimore safe. The metrics that we're looking at in terms of performance are percent reduction in homicides and non-fatal shootings, specifically in the violence reduction initiative, which is an important initiative under this goal area. Hiring and attrition that Drew already highlighted, performance year to date. High-risk individuals for gun crimes, numbers of discourteous complaints, number of castings entered into the NIBIN database. Under keeping Baltimore healthy, there are 3 strategies related to increasing access to health services, building strong neighborhoods, and better serving the homeless population. We're looking at tracking, keeping track of those initiatives. There are 40% that are implemented to date. Measures include the number of lives saved with naloxone, the number of naloxone kits distributed, the number of overdose outreach training contacts, and the number of homeless individuals brought into Code Blue shelters. along with the number of strategic housing demolitions. For engaging Baltimore's youth, we're looking at the strategies related to increasing opportunities for youth and also expanding programs. We're looking at capturing the success of the Mayor's Scholars Program, which was designed for students going to BCCC, where the mayor's initiated a program to make community college free. Percent reduction in juvenile crime, also a number of participants in initiatives such as the Mayor's Squeegee Corps. We'll also be tracking truancy rates as well as the number of YouthWorks participants. And then in the last goal area, moving Baltimore forward, we're looking at tracking the number of mobile workforce center visitors who get job readiness services, number of ex-offenders who've received at least one workforce service, number of neighborhoods that show improvement in their housing market value, as well as tracking the number of performance stat meetings. So next I'd like to talk about the Mayor's Violence Reduction Initiative. That's a key activity of my office, in that it's a daily performance statting of this important initiative. And so the Violence Reduction Initiative is a response to the Mayor's Violence Reduction Plan, a specific strategy to expand cross-agency collaboration. And so at the Mayor's direction, MOSS called a meeting of every agency back in October to identify what they all do best in terms of public safety, and to start to scope that initiative. Less than 2 weeks later, the VRI was born. Since its inception, the VRI has been effective as we look at the trends and reductions in violent crimes. The VRI has led to several key innovations. Every day at 8 a.m., there's a meeting at the Incident Command Center where senior staff of every agency meet and discuss the most pressing issues related to violence and public safety over the past 24 hours. Mayor's Office of Employment Development, Baltimore City Fire Department, they've greatly increased their collaboration, going out multiple times per week to knock on doors to do home safety and employment services outreach. Health and BPD, they've coordinated outreach on substance abuse. Recs and Parks, Fire, Police, Office of Employment Development have been collaborating on Recs and Parks BALT initiative, which I'm sure Rec and Parks will describe more in detail later. So again, the VRI is performance statted with 4 goal areas for improving the physical environment of those 7 focus areas, also providing services for priority businesses and focusing on identifying priority businesses, coordinating outreach, and then also improving community engagement and partnership. So for the physical environment improvement, what we're measuring are the number of 311 service requests that are submitted proactively by the VRI team, the time to close those service requests. In terms of priority businesses, what we're looking at is tracking the number of priority businesses identified and the number of priority business violations, as well as the number of businesses that are provided assistance for improvement. In terms of the coordinated outreach, we're looking at, we're tracking outputs, again, the number of people that are served with those targeted resources. And then as we expand the VRI, we're also expanding community engagement, focused on outreach and communications with all of the neighborhood organizations that are active in the VRI areas, and surveying those VRI areas for their needs. And wanted to highlight, again, the success to date of the VRI. And so where we are to date for the period of the VRI, homicides and non-fatal shootings are down 36% citywide. So again, we're looking at November 1st through February 17th. That's the last update of the master crime table. So that's a 36% reduction in homicides and non-fatal shootings citywide. And then looking at the VRI specifically, so just those 7 focus areas for this. So I want to highlight that for the VRI, it initiated with 5 focus areas. It was expanded February 4th to include 2 additional areas. So for the initial 3 months of the VRI, crime was down, or violent homicides and non-fatal shootings were down 13% in those 5 areas. For the last 3 weeks of the expansion, we're looking at a reduction as well in terms of homicides and non-fatal shootings, 67%. So we're also looking at the number of service requests closed since November 1, the inception of the VRI. That's been 17,188 service requests, and you can compare that to about 9,000 service requests for the same areas, same period 1 year prior. The average time to close for the top service requests is 1.6 days, and you can compare that to a city average before the VRI of 7 days. DOT, in collaboration with BGE, DPW, Rec and Parks, and Forestry have made this happen. The number of priority businesses identified was 133 for the period of the VRI. When we kicked this off, we had actually only identified 12 priority businesses. So again, we consider that a win for the VRI to identify these priority businesses, along with the subsequent inspections, as well as the outreach to improve those businesses. And I won't steal all the agencies' thunder. I'm sure they'll speak in more detail about the activities, outreach activities, and the numbers there. But overall, for the VRI, we've had a total of 45,000 outreach activities. Again, that's November 1 through February 17th, so averaging about 2,800 outreach activities per week. So wanted to just take a look at one of the many success stories of the VRI. So in addition to the proactive activity of the VRI, agencies are rapidly deploying to neighborhoods also in response to violence, to coordinate city services. I wanted to highlight 5200 Fairlawn in the Northwest focus area. On Monday, in November 2017, there was a triple shooting in the block of 5200 Fairlawn. This has been identified as a longtime hub for illegal activity, with numerous illegal street mechanics and abandoned vehicles, which served as stash points for illegal firearms and narcotics. So on November 15th, the Departments of Housing, Transportation, Public Works, Police, and the Environmental Control Board executed a combined operation which resulted in the towing of over 40 abandoned vehicles, the termination of 7 illegal BGE connections, and the closure of 13 illegal auto repair operations in this area. After the operation was over, Mayor's Office of Employment Development blanketed the area with employment outreach in order to help the people who had been displaced to find new employment. Since then, crime is down. We're doing also, there are more service requests that have been proactively entered by the community, and the time to close on those service requests has also come down. So again, just would like to take the time to thank you for allowing me to present, and also to thank the agencies for their participation in this VRI.
Thank you, Ms. Parlock. We'll ask you questions at the end of all the presentations. Dr. Dr. Santelises, can you come forward, ma'am? State your name for the record, please, ma'am.
I'm Sonia Santelises, the Chief Executive Officer for Baltimore City Public Schools, and I'd like to thank the chair for allowing me to come up, and it's a pleasure to be here as part of a collaborative effort with our partners throughout the city. I'm just going to forward quickly. Oh, there we are. And I do want to, if you will allow me, to also thank Chief Akil Ham, who represents city schools in the morning 8 o'clock meetings with our colleagues. And I just want to also commend Chief Ham because in year to date, which is not on this slide, but I would like to highlight, in 2016, 2017, we had 66 student arrests year to date, with 152 diversions of to more what we would call student center supportive options. This year, school year to date, for 17-18, we have 38 arrests, which is almost a reduction by 50%, and 309 student diversions. We are only arresting students for serious offenses in terms of handgun violations, robberies, or serious assaults, and we have substantially increased the referrals of young people to mental health options. So we're very proud of that, and we're proud of Chief Ham and school police's efforts and collaboration with the city. There are some things that we wanted to highlight here, and if the committee does have additional questions, Chief Ham will remain to answer any of those. But some of the things we want to highlight that have come out of our collaboration with our partners in the city is, first, we've been working very closely with the Western District, including Councilman Pinkett, specifically to address the pedestrian drug traffic in the areas surrounding New Song Academy, Gilmore Elementary, and William Pinder Hughes Elementary Middle. Second, school police will continue to be monitoring identified problematic businesses that might be serving students during the daytime curfew in the VRI zones that were articulated earlier. The other piece with this that has also really been helpful for us is that the deployment of police officers to the 8 major hubs of student transition. And so what we have done is we've actually increased our patrols around identified schools during the school hours. But as you all know, we have also found great success in pulling school police back into school buildings where they are building relationships with young people. And frankly, some of the, I think we've had 4, have we had 4 securing of loaded handguns? 3. Retrieval of loaded handguns in schools this year already, and again, in large part due to the fact that students themselves were alerting school police based on a refocus in schools. And then one of the things that has really come out of this VRI initiative has been sharing critical information with various agencies, particularly clearly Baltimore Police Department, MTA Police, really to assist in identifying students who are identified as committing violent crimes. And so we have worked together around that. With those agencies, we continue to partner on not just again, these direct, immediate safety work through Baltimore City Schools Police, but also we are working with our partners in Park and Rec to make sure that we have additional options and collaboration with young people. And even though our colleagues in BPD have left, we are also partnering with them to identify schools and young people to work specifically with regards to helping to establish better relationships with school police. So that's my 2 to 3 minutes. I think I kept in time, and if you have further questions, I'll either take some now or Chief Ham will remain.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilman Scott.
Department of Housing and Community Development.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the council, and my colleagues here. I'm going to keep with Dr. Santelises' speed dating approach here. We were told
Mr. Braverman, we all know who you are. Give your name for the record. And for
Michael
the folks watching
Braverman. I'm the
TV.
Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development. Good evening. I also want to start by introducing my team We have Assistant Commissioner Eric Booker here, who is our point in the morning VRI sessions. He's got about 80 housing inspectors on the street. In addition to everything else they do, I want to focus a little bit today about the property-based approach, altering the built environment that directly impacts crime. So I just wanted to say there's probably about 8,000 work orders that happen a year with our colleagues at the Department of Public Works to board the 16,000 vacant buildings that are out there. More than 75, 80%, and 90% since the launch of the VRI initiative are all inspector initiated. So that's his team out there identifying them ahead of any kind of citizen call. I want to introduce Jason Hessler, who is our Assistant Commissioner for Litigation, and also runs our property-based crime solution strategies, which I'll talk a little bit about, among everything else. And Chief Tom Waugh, who runs our Special Investigations Division. He leads the Social Club Task Force inspections and the Priority Business inspections, among other things. I wanted to just start by saying, to build on something Dr. Santalisa said, above and beyond the numbers that we're talking about with this VRI initiative, this initiative has led to a sense of partnering among the different actors in city government and agencies that are normally siloed. So we're doing all this work with a sense of urgency. We're doing it collaboratively. And as Dr. Santalisa said, we're building these partnerships that are useful to affecting, a more efficient and collaborative city government. It's an outcome that we're not really measuring, but I think it's an important outcome anytime we do this work. Let me see if I can run quickly to my sides and stick to 3 minutes. So on the property-based, again, neighborhood revitalization, which is one of the things we do, and a myriad of activities that we do at DHCD, is one of the mayor's anti-crime strategies. But we're going to focus in on just some tactical things that we do as sort of force multipliers for BPD. So all the different arrests and all the different calls for service and all the different executions of warrants at various locations, we, as a force multiplier, will come in Jason's team in the Property-Based Crime Solutions program and literally bring in action to shut down the ongoing activity at one location. So no matter what is happening or who is arrested or what is recovered, often the location remains hot. And as much as we want to bring that location into compliance, ultimately shutting it down becomes an important community development approach and an important anti-crime approach. So some of us who have long memories remember what used to be known as the Ranch out the Pall Mall Apartments. Yeah, remember that? And we revoked their multifamily dwelling license. The place shuttered. We bought the place, demolished the place, and now it's new construction, affordable senior housing. So it's an extraordinary outcome and a crime strategy, community development outcome and crime strategy. Those of us who remember 2000 East North Avenue, before it was the Columbus School, which it is, again, before it was the affordable housing as the Columbus School. Again, it was a difficult site of regular ongoing criminal activity. We shut it down. It became we took title, it became a low-income housing tax credit deal. It is now affordable housing, anchoring that spot on 2000 block of East North Avenue and part of a community development strategy, as well as affordable housing. What was known as Murder Mall, which was Madison Park North Apartments, is now a cleared 8-acre site. We revoked their multifamily dwelling license, and we're looking forward to significant community development benefits from that. Again, community development is a great anti-crime strategy. These are what we call property-based crime solutions, working with BPD to support their padlock operations. We handle those hearings for them, filing drug nuisance actions on individual single-family houses around the city, and the Social Club Task Force and Priority Business inspections. Again, working in the VRI means that the commanders at BPD know that they may have had ongoing nuisance activity at various locations, but there's a team around the city that has tools that can often shut these places down. And so we work as a team across the city with Chief Ford and his team regularly going out with Chief Wall, working regularly with the Liquor Board, et cetera. We've gotten some great outcomes. In terms of cleaning, securing the built environment, that is another effort to simply alter the built environment so that it is better for our citizens and easier to police. So the nonstop activity that Assistant Commissioner Booker and his team do, responding to work orders and clean and sanitation and securing vacant buildings, and proactively in the areas where the vacant buildings are, keeping them secure. Again, with our partners at DPW, we create the work orders within a couple of days. They're out there boarding the place, and literally about 80% of what is boarded stays boarded 18 months later. Again, we're working with Eric is there every morning with the commanders at VRI. It's worth mentioning, we do demolition in the city of Baltimore. Demolition is, among other things, is a community development component, enhancing the quality of life in communities. It is an anti-crime strategy. So those of us who remember the 2700 block of Tivoli, there must be somebody in the room that remembers what the 2700 block of Tivoli was like when it was standing. See some head shaking in the BPD. 80 houses, all of which were abandoned, nonstop site of drug activity. It cost a fair amount of money and required a lot of work on DHCD's part, but it is all cleared. We're going to continue that clearance to include the 2700 block of Fenwick and Hugo. We're going to end up with a development site, and we already have interest in new construction townhomes on that 2700 block of Tivoli. So it's a complete 180 in terms of a crime problem, and a community development solution. I wanted to mention just one thing about, for those of us who remember the 400 block of Whitridge and Lorraine, they were extraordinary problems. The 400 block of Whitridge is a fantastic story of BPD and their community services officer, who I think was Doug Gibson, who may still be on the force, regularly showing up at community meetings, identifying the problem properties, and then the team in the property-based crime solution program bringing individual drug nuisance actions until the 2 or 3 houses on that long block of Whitridge that were literally causing all the problems were vacated, and suddenly people could come out on their porches again. Developers were interested in rehabbing, and that block of Whitridge, which was more than half vacant, there's probably only a couple of vacant buildings left, and there's a thriving market there, again, in housing. And again, in terms of altering the built environment, we will walk with the commanders. They will identify. I walked with Major Briscoe on the 2400 block of North Stockton. This is an alley street. There was only one real reason to be on that street, in the immortal words of the old former Judge Hubbard, and that would be monkey business. And we have identified that block for demolition, and that'll make it a world of difference for policing. So I think that was about 3 minutes. I know you may have questions. Just wanted to focus in on some tactical moves that we can do to be part of the crime fight.
Thank you, Mr. Braverman. Housing Authority of Baltimore City.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the council, and my colleagues. My name is Janet Abrahams. I am the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City.
Ma'am, can you pull the mic up just a little bit?
Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
Keep forgetting my height. The Housing Authority of Baltimore City, we're going through a transition. So one of the basic things that we are doing, we're going back to basics. And one of the basic things for the safety initiative is the camera and lighting initiatives that we're doing. The staff, they're mandated to visit the properties in the evenings after hours, create surveys of all the lightings that we as a housing authority is responsible for. They have 24 hours to address those lightings, but we are also working with BGE on the lightings that they are also responsible for, because we found that a lot of those lights have been out for quite some time in the property. So we're definitely working to address those issues. We have recently been granted $250,000 grant from HUD to install cameras, extend a fiber connection, install cameras, security lighting at Brooklyn Homes. That's something that we're working with BPD to administer. We have also started a strategic fence repair program. So far, we have installed 100 security screens in 30 of our units that at one of our properties. That is as a result of the numerous break-ins that we have been experiencing at this property. From a fencing perspective, we realized that our fence is an access point for drug activity, so we are definitely working towards that. But overall, one of the main things that the Housing Authority is doing, we have initiated a strategic plan, and in the strategic plan, we're covering safety. One of the things there are 4 points to the strategic plan. We have an overall crime analysis that will be done. We're looking at physical enhancement of the properties, and we're also looking at community engagement and partnerships. At the next report, we will be able to talk about the goals and all the milestones that we have initiated for those 4 points. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Baltimore City Department of Transportation.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, Council Chair and Council members. My name is Michelle Pouchot. I'm the Director of the Baltimore City Department of Transportation, and I'll be brief as well. I want to start by thanking Marshal Toby Goodwin, who leads this effort for us, and he's there every day, working hard. Thank you, Toby, and catalyzing the resources in the department toward this important initiative. I first, though, want to talk about the most important effort in the department, which is street lighting and improving street lighting. And I'd like to thank Ama Bindi for being the program manager for this area. What we've done, we've entered into a partnership with BGE. And we know that that has been a difficult relationship in the past, and I'm really excited about where we are and how we're moving forward, as well as with DPW and other members of the cabinet. And so we've divided this program into 3 strategic areas, moving our lighting in our city to the 21st century, and really becoming one of the first cities to have full LED lighting throughout the city. Working with BGE, we're about halfway through the program. 43,000 lights, new LED lights have been installed all over the city as of the end of last year. And over the next 2 years, we'll complete that effort with 34,000 additional lights being installed all around the city. And this is so important for violence reduction. And what we're doing in addition to putting those new lights in, we're looking at appropriate lighting, because lighting is not only about police protection, it's also about community building. The next phase of the effort is the Mayor's Be More Bright program, which began with testing last year with BGE, where we could install 6,000 new lights. And what's important about this program is we're first looking at where the new LED lights have been installed, because we know that some areas are kind of dark because of the lighting that's in there today. Once we put those LED lights in and we see where new lights are still needed, we're going to install additional lighting in those areas. And so this year we'll be installing 2,400 of those new lights, and the remainder will be installed in 2019. And last but not least, but this is really important, and as I met with each and every council member when I first came to the government, I learned that the divide between BGE and DOT and how lights are owned or maintained or operated, and when folks call in for them to be repaired and how we respond, was really kind of a moving target. And so we've entered into a relationship with BGE where we're standardizing our response method, and we're working toward having an invisible operation so that when complaints are called in, that we're responsive, we have the same response time frames, and really working with Kendra Pollack and her efforts have been great in order to move that forward. And so what we're seeing in the VRI areas in particular are the response times being cut in half. And where we have extended technical difficulties, you can see the people out there working every day. I have one more slide that I want to go through quickly, but I do want to talk somewhat about abandoned vehicles. And there was a picture in an earlier slide, and I want to also thank Charlie Charlie Baker, who heads up our towing shop, because we've gone in and working with housing, working with the police department, working with the fire department, working with the private sector. We've begun to move those vehicles in an unparalleled fashion, working through many legal issues in order to affect this area. And so that's been really exciting. But last but not least is how we've attacked everything else that we do for communities every day. And I want to recognize Kenny Ching, who heads up our maintenance operation. And so we have cut our response time in half in the VRI areas. And I'm really proud to say that not only has our responsiveness increased in those areas, but they've also increased throughout the city. And so this program and the efforts of those that I have named has catalyzed the resources on how we can do our jobs better everywhere in the city. And the thing that I learned when we put together this presentation, and you'll see on the numbers that are on the bottom of the slide, is that we know in transportation sometimes neighborhoods that are dealing with violence, they don't call in for the kind of things we do. But we know that those things need to be done first and foremost to re-engage those communities. And we're seeing the call-ins, the requests, and working with the team, that we're seeing the numbers grow exponentially in the kind of service delivery that's being requested by DOT and being delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Department of Public Works.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of committee. I'm Rudy Chow, Director of Public Works.
Good evening, sir.
I'm pleased to report on the department's contribution to the violence reduction strategy. But before I start, I just want to thank the City Council for confirming Mr. John Chalmers as the Bureau Head of Solid Waste, and he had done a tremendous job, as you'll see in the preceding slides. Okay, so over the past year, the Department Bureau of Solid Waste has been prioritizing responses to service requests in the transformation zones, and in more recent months has done the same for the VRI. Cleaning and securing the transformation zones and VRI neighborhoods by cleaning and boarding vacant properties and by clearing debris from street alleys and vacant lots reduces the atmosphere of neglect that can help foster criminal activities and supports a healthier living environment for residents. The Bureau of Solid Waste quadrant system, which we transitioned to early last year, has been integral into our ability to respond quickly to the VRI and transformation zones. The quadrant system has proven to give us more flexibility in the deployment of personnel and equipment to tackle sanitation problems within each quadrant. It has also allowed each quadrant team to become more familiar with the neighborhoods and that they serve. Solid Waste has an aggressive goal for closing service requests, which they have met. The overall average internal response time for solid waste service requests in the focus area was 17.2 days. During the VRI, solid waste crews reduced the time 86% to an average response time of 2.39 days. This accelerated response time was accomplished while also maintaining the regular workload of closing service requests throughout the rest of the city. We are working on a plan to maintain the same accelerated level of service as we move into the more demanding warm weather season. Now, from October 1st, 2017 to February 16, 2018, the Bureau of Solid Waste closed 9,836 SRs in the VRI zones. I'm very proud of our solid waste team who, through their hard work, were able to focus on the target zones and mark incredible improvements to their response time. I'm also pleased by the highly productive relationship and level of cooperations that have grown between all agencies, including the police department. This program has helped each department understand the different role and, importantly, the parts that we all play in trying to lower the rate in violence. We're working in one big collective effort to get the job done. Going forward, we'll work to continue our accelerated response time and to work closely with other agencies. We also hope to have a more sophisticated analysis on what aspects of our efforts are having the most effective impact to support our goals. We appreciate the City Council's attention in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Child. Chief Ford, you're up, sir.
Good evening, Council. My name is Niles Ford, and I am the fire chief for the city of Baltimore. Let me find, okay. First, let me introduce my staff that I have with me as well. My ops chief, I have Assistant Chief Mark Wagner. Mark Wagner is the one that actually goes to the VRI and represents the operational side of the organization. I have Assistant Chief Jeff Siegel. He's over Safety Member Services, means he handles HR, safety, and training. I also have with me Chief Everett. Chief Everett is over Community Risk Reduction. Community Risk Reduction covers the Fire Marshal's Office, IT, logistics, and all communications, 911, and call takers. I also have with me the Fire Marshal, Carl Zimmerman, and he also attends the 8 o'clock meetings with VRI and the phone calls as well in the afternoon. I have my Chief of Staff, Amy Beth Lazier, and the Special Assistant to the Fire Chief, Chief Roman Clark. Some of the things that we've done in respects to the VRI is Light It Up. Light It Up is when our units between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. are out in the field working, whether they're returning from a call or just doing a service, that they turn on all the lights, not the strobe lights, not the lights that are the emergency lights, but the white lights that surround the vehicle, and it kind of lights up the area. Also, we've focused our home and safety inspections, our home safety surveys, heavily in these areas, and we've broken them down in quadrants. Let me give you some of the numbers that we've done. As far as our door knockings in these areas since the beginning of the VRI, we're at 9,130. The home inspections we've done, 4,076 home inspections or home surveys. Smoke alarm installations, we've done 1,296. And we also have I'm probably going to jump ahead of myself, but we've partnered with Park and Recs, who is doing a fantastic job, where we started off going to 3 rec centers, increased to 5, increased to 7, and now we're at 9, and we have come in contact with 2,964 individuals. And during those episodes, we've done things like teaching hands-only CPR, training the young people about how to set up exit drills to get in and out the house. Also the importance of carbon monoxide dangers, and we've done free blood pressure screenings. Now, when we do the home safety inspections, we literally go throughout the house and evaluate things that make the house safer, like installing smoke alarms, like paying attention to extension cords and things like that. Our goal is to show a significant presence in these areas, and a personal one at that. And we do it as a task force. We include the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. I'm certain they'll talk about that later. One thing that we did leave off this slide that I'd like to include, we have, over the last several years, we have started programs with young people where we've tried to work to get young people into the fire service. We have a high school program where we train them, and after they go through the training and go through all the processes they're supposed to go through, they literally become a member of our organization. So over the past 2 years, between the young people being in high school, to actually having several of them employed by the fire department as firefighters and EMTs, we're somewhere just below the number 50. So our goal is to expand. The Vulcan Blazers are doing things to help us. One of the things that they've done is they've started an Explorer troop, Explorer organization. We were focusing on high school age people. They started focusing on middle school age people to try to direct them into these programs. So we're very excited about that. And Mr. Chairman, I'll be prepared to answer any questions at the end of all the presentations.
Thank you. The Health Department, Mr. Amorose.
Good evening, Councilman Scott. My name is Jeff Amaris. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for the City Health Department. Here on behalf of our Health Commissioner, Dr. Lena Wen, who apologizes about not being able to be here tonight. I want to share a few notes real quick on our portion of the VRI. Here we go. So first up, a lot of the work we're doing in the VRI centers on our syringe exchange program and overdose outreach. So I'd actually like to thank Councilman Scott and this committee for calling a hearing on our opioid epidemic this past September that allowed us to present a lot of those statistics then. To update you on where we are now, January 17 versus January 18. January 17, we had 59 people whose lives were saved through use of naloxone by regular residents of the city of Baltimore. January 18, we had 81, so it's a big increase. We also distributed a lot more kits. We distributed 714 kits in January of 17 versus 1,089 this January. We held 141 trainings in January of 17 versus 159 in January of 18, and trained 822 individuals in January of 17 versus 1,156 in January of 18. So what does that mean? It means that we're getting out a lot more naloxone onto the streets, into the hands of residents. We've seen 1,706 lives saved through the use of naloxone by residents of the city of Baltimore in the last 3 years. So we're just trying to accelerate that pace as much as possible. And in the VRIs, we're trying to hold targeted trainings on overdose in areas that we know are hotspots. Additionally, we're also working upstream, continuing the work that we've been doing for years in this effort through Be More for Healthy Babies and through our lead poisoning prevention program. Be More for Healthy Babies, since its inception in 2009, has reduced the infant mortality rate in the city by 38%. It's also reduced the rate disparity between the deaths of black babies versus white babies, although there still is a lot of work to do in that arena. We continue to advocate for legislation to that effect too in Annapolis. In fact, tomorrow, some of our staff will be testifying for a fund bill that would help fund programs that target women both during pregnancy and postpartum who are living in low-income communities throughout the state. Finally, our lead poisoning prevention work throughout the city, and specifically in the VRIs, continues to address the upstream issue of lead poisoning and the behavioral impacts it has. So we do case management, outreach, and education aimed primarily at prevention and risk reduction. And again, that's another area where we're advocating frequently in Annapolis to try and change the laws at the state level to make it easier and more effective for the work that we do here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Recreation and Parks.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and other members of the committee. My name is Reginald Moore, Director of Recreation and Parks. And before I start talking about briefly what we're doing with VRI, I want to introduce our staff, my staff that's here, who really makes this a reality for us. Jenny Morgan is our legislative liaison. Scott Stanfield is our strategic analyst, and they do a little bit of everything. And Asia Scott, she's my midnight hawk. She's constantly out of the center. She's our new community initiative partner. We're excited what we're happening. Our role in the VRI was to introduce a program called BOAT. BOAT is centered around business, art, leisure, and team building. Within that, as part of this role, is we had to look at extending our hours of operations. On Friday nights, our hours are open. Our centers are open to 11, and on Saturdays they're open from 5 to midnight. And what we did was we went into those zones and we looked at rec centers and how they can actually impact different areas of the community. So centers right now that we have online. We have 8, which is Rita Church, Lydian Jones, James McHenry, Robert C. Marshall, Christmas Attic, C.C. Jackson, Oliver Rec Center, Greenmount. Starting this Friday, we will open our 9th center, which will be in the Southwest District, which is Samuel F. B. Morris. And then we're looking in the near future to open our 10th site. In addition, what we've seen in the first 16 weeks has been amazing when it comes to the numbers and participation. We've seen over 23,000 youth and adults that came through our rec centers. To break down those numbers a little bit, what we've seen our biggest trend area is about 8,500, and what we will identify as our Northwest District. We've seen about 6,600 in our East District, which is a Rita Church area, and we've seen in our Central District about 6,400, which is our biggest and largest areas. Another thing, as many of my colleagues have mentioned, is our collaboration as agencies and working together. And I have to acknowledge that, as the chief hit on earlier, the fire department coming out on Friday nights and teaching and engaging with those young people. Also, our police department, we just wrapped up our BOLO initiative, which is Baltimore Officers Lending Opportunities, which was a flag football program that we offered to the 9 districts, and we host that program because of the cool weather. Originally, we was going to do it at Druid Hill, but the cool weather pushed us inside it, and we finished that up at Myers. In addition, I want to talk about, of course, with our forestry department, play a vital role with closing closing SRs in the VRI zone. Pruning trees, 158 closures. In addition, improving lighting as far as pruning trees for our 6 City Watch cameras. A couple other things I just want to highlight programming-wise. What's been amazing as I've gone out to these sites on the weekends, C.C. Jackson has a cosmetology program. We have a young lady that comes in and teaches young ladies about hair products and how to take care of their hair, and also starting to introducing them to some basic things when it comes to chemicals and those things, which has been quite interesting. Another program at C.C. Jackson I've seen is, of course, our midnight basketball program is packed every Friday and Saturday night from start to finish. At Lydian Jones, our Keys program, we work with Keys Development, and as they continue to help us develop with our youth. But what touched me was a night I was at Christmas Attic, and it was these 7 young ladies that came to Ty Rice, who's at that time was our rec leader, and that was emotional. And I kind of remember, because I visit the centers quite often during this period of time, is that he had some challenges with him, and they came to him, they presented him with this poster and told him thank you, because if we didn't offer this opportunity, if he didn't tolerate them, where would they be? And to me, that's what it's all about. And since that, we've started a program called Black Women Motivating Mentoring Program, where we have young ladies that come in and talk to this group of young ladies and continue to mentor them and keep them positive, engaged in our community center. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mayor's Office of Employment Development.
Good evening, Jason Perkins Cohen, Director of Mayor's Office of Employment Development. Very glad to be here. Before I get into my slides, there we go. Before I get into my slides, I just want to talk a little bit broadly, very briefly, the whole point of this hearing, and I think that what you all espouse and which we agree with is that we reduce crime by increasing opportunity. And that's what our agency is trying to do every day. That's how we measure ourselves. And while we're only going to take a minute and a half here, I just want to make clear that it's much bigger than 2 slides. And what we're about is not only just about jobs, but about helping residents increase their skills, advance their education, so they can get the career that they want and deserve, and helping employers come into the city and find their workforce. So, first point is on YouthWorks. And I'm not just talking about YouthWorks because it's something to talk about. It's because the research shows how important summer jobs programs are. There was a study done by Brookings that was released in January, and it echoes what studies, it was studying Boston. It echoes studies that were done in New York and Chicago, that participants in summer jobs employment programs see significantly reductions in crime. So in the Boston program, participants were 35% less likely to participate in violent crime and 57% less likely to participate in property crime. So bringing that to Baltimore, the slide is actually a little bit incorrect because the numbers are changing every day. As of 11:59 last night, 15,358 young people had registered for YouthWorks. That is a 25% increase from last year. It is a 42% increase from 2 years ago. Anecdotally, I've talked to my counterparts in the other cities. They don't see anything like this. And it's because young people in Baltimore want to work, and the city, whether it knew it or not, made a promise to them the last couple of summers that if you registered for YouthWorks and did what we asked you to do, we were going to help get you a job. And so I know you believe strongly in YouthWorks, and we need the council's help. And I'm really proud of the agencies that I get to work with. All of them are YouthWorks sites last year and participated, and we are very grateful for that. I do want to point out that March 2nd, this Friday, is the last day for young people to register for YouthWorks. We expect we'll hit around 16,000, but that is the last day. Another point, again, not doing it just because it feels right, is what the research shows, is that there's this transition point when young people leave high school, whether they leave and they don't finish or they do complete high school. If they're not going to college, we got to make sure that we're doing something for them. And so what I'm excited about, I know Dr. Santelisa's had to leave, and I know Chief Ham is here, is getting into the schools, which is not something that the Mayor's Office of Employment Development had really been doing before. And there's two particular initiatives. There's really three. The first is, as you can see, we're finding out who has dropped out of school, and we're going and doing outreach to those young people that have dropped out for whatever reason. And then the second is a job fair. It's the Mayor's Job Fair on May 9th for high school seniors that are not planning to go to college. It's the first job fair that we've done like this. We've already got 40 employers who are committed with a lot more than 40 jobs to be at War Memorial. We want to make sure that the council knows about that. And we will have buses leaving from high schools and driving them to War Memorial, waiting for them and taking them back to school to help make sure that they can get there and participate. And then the last thing on that issue is training programs, because a lot of young people don't actually have the skills or the certifications that employers are looking for. And working with the school system and Baltimore's Promise, we'll have 250 free training slots for high school seniors starting this year, another 250 next year. Again, we have a recruiter going into schools and letting young people know about training programs in construction and healthcare and IT. We have not done that before. Next point is about outreach. We've been very grateful for our partnership with the Pratt Library. I'll let them talk about what their mobile unit has done, but it's certainly blazed the trail for us, and we've been fortunate to work with them. The mayor will have another mobile unit, we believe in April, could be May, we hope it's April. And every day I'm talking with community members who are trying to book that mobile unit. It's, as you know, a big deal to make sure that people know about the services they can receive. And the last thing, as part of the VRI, we are out there every day. Carrie Owens had to leave. We partner with Chief Ford and the fire department, knocking on doors every day, letting people know about the job opportunities, because it's so much about, again, about opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mayor's Office of Human Services.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Councilman Pinkett. Thanks for giving us an opportunity to speak with you tonight. It's not often that human services are included in these conversations, and the idea of providing support, intervention, and prevention to some of our most vulnerable populations in the city really is a foundation to any crime reduction plan. So we'll go over a few things quickly here. So we are a hive of agencies within Human Services. We have within us the one most of you know about, Homeless Services. We also have Head Start, Education and Youth Services, and our Community Action Partnership Centers. So to go through quickly, we have now created a community outreach team. For the first time, we've now got this ability to go out into the community to act as navigators, service providers, mediators, and constituent service providers. We're at community meetings, helping talk to about what we're really doing about homelessness. We've been to about 10 community meetings in the last couple of weeks, and we're able to engage other agencies in responses to these concerns. We will have 7 outreach workers by March 12th, 1 fluent in Spanish. 5 of those outreach workers are currently or formerly homeless. We'll all be city employees. We're proud of that. Journey to Jobs, the first time ever that Baltimore's Homeless Services Agency has had a component within it designed to link jobs, transitional and permanent, with folks that are currently or formerly recently homeless. That's going to include working with other agencies to identify expungement needs and work on IDs. We just added a question about homelessness or employment to our PIT count, our annual census. 85% of the homeless people counted on the street say that they're actively looking to work. That says something pretty incredible and something that we have to tackle, particularly if these folks are going to stay in the homes once they're placed. We now have a citywide vulnerability index. What we do is we prioritize people for permanent housing based on their vulnerability. Factors include who has been a victim of physical, sexual, or mental abuse, recent history of incarceration, and high utilization of services like the emergency room. And that's something that's going to unify the way that we link to permanent housing moving forward. We fund 200 households a year through House of Ruth with shelter, 20 households with rapid rehousing for victims of domestic violence. And through our campaign to end youth homelessness, this year we're on track to take 40 youth off the street into permanent housing, 18 to 24 years old, most of whom have recently aged out of foster care or the juvenile system and found themselves on the street. These are some of the most vulnerable folks in our communities. Talking about children and youth. The city invests more than $9 million directly into something, Councilman, I know you care deeply about, community schools and out-of-school time programs. We expect that work to continue. The city is an active participant in the Summer Funding Collaborative. That's $3.5 million towards summer programming. The mayor's office has prioritized programs that serve youth in or around VRI. We got 100 different applications for programs that have plans for serving youth in the VRI this summer. And all of these programs, these staff have access to trauma-informed programs and the like. Of those 45 community schools funded by the City of Baltimore, 11 sit in or just on the edge of VRI zones. And then finally, there is a study that just came out of Chicago. Their city-funded child parent centers, very similar to Head Start. What that study found was that children who do not participate in preschool, high-quality preschool or youth development programs are 70% more likely to be arrested for a violent crime by age 18. So we don't mess around in this idea that we need youth in these high-quality programs from an early age. We have 2,830 youth participating in Head Start in the city, in addition to the 4,000 being served with OST programs. So, Councilman, we're getting started early for what we see to be the real violence reduction initiative for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Baltimore Development Corporation. Welcome back, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm going to show my colleagues what 3 minutes really looks like. Mr. Chairman, we have enthusiastically supported this initiative, and our folks have been out in the field with many of my fellow agency heads and their great employees in visiting businesses. And we have visited 79 priority businesses that were identified by the police and by other agencies as being problematic. In addition to that, we've extended our outreach to every business in a zone. So we've upped it and have now hit 42 non-priority businesses. We really see this as a bridge building exercise, and we're looking at increasing our facade improvement grant program and giving facade improvement grants in these areas to help a business become more welcoming. Clearly, it will help the police if they can see inside a business, get the windows cleaned up, add lighting, and do the types of things you can do with a successful facade improvement grant. We also are pushing our microloan program and trying to get businesses to invest in selling the type of products that will make these stores much more conducive to a neighborhood store. With that, we'll continue to look at our tools that we're offering these small businesses to determine whether or not there are additional resources that we need to ask for from the council or from the administration. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I finish in 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Department of Planning.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tom Stoser. I'm Director of Planning. Pardon me. And I would really like to introduce and thank Stephanie Madden-Smith, who's here, our Assistant Director for Equity, Engagement, and Communications. She's our point person who attends those 8 a.m. meetings and the after the meeting meetings where they talk further strategy, particularly on things like outreach, which we're heavily engaged in through our comprehensive planners and our partnering with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods to schedule a series of informational meetings so communities know what's going on and how they can help support all the crime fighting initiatives going on. We also provide some strategic GIS mapping as a resource. And we've done that for agencies like the Liquor Board. We work very closely with Housing and Community Development on the blight elimination strategies and targeting of core dollars, and also with the city stat team overall. And it's just really a great opportunity for planning to plug into these initiatives and see how they layer with everything else we're doing in terms of neighborhood planning, our greening strategies, capital improvement programming. All of this really needs to tie together for the larger community development objectives, which is really the overall goal. So thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Enoch Pratt, Library.
Good evening. All right. My name is Heidi Daniel. Thank you for having me. I'm the CEO of Enoch Pratt Free Library. We have recently expanded our hours dramatically by 30% across the city. So every single one of the Enoch Pratt Free Library branches is open now 6 days a week. A minimum of 49 hours, with the Pennsylvania and North Avenue branch and the Southeast Anchor branch having more hours than our other branches, open 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, 10 to 5 on Friday and Saturday. Our central library is now open 7 days a week, 10 to 7 Monday through Thursday, 10 to 5 Friday, Saturday, and 1 to 5 on Sunday. So that was a major expansion for us. We've also put our book buggy, our mobile library, and our job unit on the road 5 days a week, which is an expansion for them as well. And our mobile job center services communities with 50% or higher unemployment rates. And they have served at this point over 10,000 customers. And they average about 11 customers per hour. And of course, they get help on that job unit for everything from interviewing to possible job opportunities, and then we refer them to the Mayor's Office of Employment Development as needed. The expanded programming for early learning and youth, we have several early learning programs. We're very focused on kindergarten readiness and making sure that those children that aren't being in high quality preschool have another opportunity to come, and those families and caregivers also have resources at their fingertips. We have a community youth corps for teens, which serves about 160 youth every year and gives them about 6,500 service hours. And then a lot of times they transition into library employees. We also have expanded partnership programming. Our social worker in the library is at 4, about to be 6 of our locations. It's a partnership with the University of Maryland, providing wraparound social services. We have legal aid as a partner, providing lawyer in the library, and they do expungements as well as other civil issues at 3 of our locations currently. We have a partnership with Baltimore Ceasefire that we're about to start to lead conversations around nonviolence in several of our branches. And we're also partnering with the health department to provide Narcan training for in several of our branches for the public, as well as providing the training for our staff, who often are seeing many customers with these issues. Our central library renovation is underway and will be complete in 2019. It will have a dedicated area for partner agencies to conduct programs, classes, as well as dedicated job and career space. We'll also have a teen wing, which will have an audio recording booth and state-of-the-art maker space. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all. We will now move into the questions. Ms. Parlock, first set of questions that I have, and I know my colleagues have some, are for you. Can you tell us more about the metrics for the VI zones, break them out? So what the metrics are? Do you guys have a set amount? You want to see homicides reduced by a certain amount, non-fatal shootings reduced by a certain amount, overdoses reduced by a certain amount, time frames that you want the agency's SRs to decrease by a certain amount? You have to come to the podium, man. They're still filming.
So for the Violence Reduction Initiative, we have 4 goal areas where we've established baseline performance based on the 3 months the first 3 months of the initiative. So we came together in the end of October, beginning of November, as a response to how crime had been trending and spiked in October. So for those 3 months, we now have a baseline of performance that we can use to establish goals. So right now, our performance metrics, are all outputs like I described before. So the related to the cleaning and greening, it's the outputs of the number 311 service requests, the proactive ones, the time to close. So we're looking at goals of maintaining the performance that we had for those first 3 months. So maintaining, below 2 days for time to close, and then also the percent closed on time. Then looking at the coordinated outreach, we have average number of outreach activities that we established for those first 3 months that we're looking at goals for the future. And then looking at our priority businesses and inspections, again, looking at that performance as the basis for the future. Still working on developing metrics that are beyond just the outputs, but to measure effectiveness and efficiency.
Thank you for that, because I think that if this is a violence reduction initiative, we should be talking about how we're going to reduce violence, right? We can't have, we appreciate the metrics, and you weren't here last year, so it was last year in February that myself and the members of this committee said that you guys should do what you guys decided to do in November, and that's have all the agencies work together. So while we appreciate that you guys are doing that now, for us it took a little too long, but also for you guys to be here tonight to not be able to tell us what the metrics are as far as reducing violence. So in the past, when we've had things like this, we've had plans and initiatives. It would say the goal is to reduce non-fatal shootings in this neighborhood or this VIR zone by 25% or 30% or whatever percent. That should be the kind of thing that we're talking about this late in the game in this program. The same thing with the SRs, and that leads into my next question. How are the service requests put into the VIR zones? Because it was brought to my attention early on that police officers were actually putting them in themselves through 311 app. Is that still the case today?
So the SRs are put in proactively. We have housing, DPW, DOT that are putting in service requests. Each morning at 8 a.m., we're getting priorities highlighted by BPD, and so those are being put in by agencies. But yeah, there are still some service requests that are put in by BPD, but the majority, I would say, are not.
Because I saw that, and because housing is a high-functioning agency, especially code enforcement for us, we saw that housing had a significant amount of theirs be put in by themselves. But
Right.
we did not see the same thing in DOT's or DPW's presentation. So can we talk about how that is? And then also, if the mayor has already told all the agency heads that they have to be in this area, then shouldn't they be there? And why do police officers have to put in 311 requests through the app? Leave out the fact that they should have access to the city's inner system, but shouldn't they already be there? Why can't the other agencies do what Mr. Booker is doing and having their people deploy in those areas to see those things ahead of time?
Right. So I'm not aware of the extent that BPD is putting in 311 service requests. I know those are prioritized at the VRI, and so everyone's there to take those locations and then go out that day to address them. So I'll have to follow up on that.
And thank you. And do you have a time frame that you guys are going to have more metrics and things that you're going to base the success of this program by? Because as I said in the start earlier today, basing it off of reduction for last year is not a success to us, right? Because we know what last year was. So the baseline, in my opinion, should be 2011 and 2014, what happened in those neighborhoods at that exact time frame at those times. But do you have a time frame when you guys were going to be able to present to the council, or when we bring you back to talk about actual metrics, how we're going to measure the violence reduction and whether it's a success?
Yes, we are. So just wanted to add, so yes, violence reduction is the goal. And so yes, every day we're talking about the violence that happened, just within the past 24 hours since we met. we're reviewing, violence, by area weekly. What we experienced for the first 3 months, the VRI, a 12% reduction in homicides and non-fatal shootings. Then you can look at that same time in the VRI, over 30% reduction citywide. So we do feel as if the work that's being done by the agencies for this initiative is having an effect citywide, right? So using those numbers as a baseline is where we're looking at establishing goals, for the future. I don't have the timing of that, but I'll update you.
Thank you, ma'am. Questions for Ms. Parlock?
No. Yes. Thank you, Mr.
Councilman
Chair.
Pinkett.
I just had, I think, 2 quick questions. One of the slides shows the number of like 17,000 SRs closed. What's the definition of a closed SR?
So a service request that was completed.
Okay, so we can be because sometimes that's not the definition.
Right.
But according to VRI or this, we can be confident that in this incident, that a close means that this task was completed.
I would find that the majority of, in terms of the service requests that we're focused on in the focus areas, closed not being closed is really a lot to lighting, and one of the great outcomes of the VRI is that we have now this collaboration with BGE, where we have a dedicated representative from BGE that Toby Goodwin works with, and so we can close means close for those light requests.
Okay, that's good. I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but sometimes we as council persons, we find out that closed didn't really mean complete. It just meant closed. And so,
and just to preview a little bit with the, so we use the Motorola database for 311, and that's we're shifting to the Salesforce CRM, which is due to launch in the spring. But a part of the improvement with that change in the technology platform and the database we're using is that for each of the closed will be closed with further instruction, right? So we'll have more operational definitions around closing those service requests.
Good, thank you. I just had one other question. I noticed that part of the violence reduction plan was access to health services, and so we're touting the opening of a new health clinic on East Fayette Street. Being that this is part of the plan for violence reduction, is there plans for a health center in West Baltimore or a state-of-the-art health center? Because we currently don't have a state-of-the-art health center in West Baltimore. So if this is part of the violence reduction plan, I'm assuming that there's somebody's planning to develop a state-of-the-art health center in West Baltimore also.
Right, so the mayor's violence reduction plan is laid out in those 4 goal areas with the strategies identified, as well as initiatives that were underway and some that were to be implemented. So it's not all inclusive. I don't have any update on future plans for those centers, but I can follow up.
Okay, but I just want to be clear that a state-of-the-art health clinic is thought of as being a part of the violence reduction plan.
It's a part of the mayor's violence.
Yes.
It's one of the initiatives in the mayor's violence reduction plan.
Okay, so I just want to be clear that I expect to see a state-of-the-art health clinic for West Baltimore, since it's clearly a part of the plan. Thank you.
Ms. Parlock, just to follow back up on my other point, I think that to try to convey it in a different way, the point I'm trying to make is that in your job, the only way that you can hold these fine people accountable is if you set targets for them. For example, for Mr. Moore, if you tell him that you want to see a 30% increase in the membership of directioners in the VRI zones, right? For Commissioner D'Souza, of course, it would be related to crime. For Ms. Porchot, if it's a percentage decrease in the amount of light SRs that come in. Those are the kind of things that we expect to be presented to us, and we'll be making that request to Mr. Vetter to have those kind of things presented to us in the next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next questions are for Mr. Amoros.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. You talked about the Narcan and naloxone. Has the status changed that we are just still giving that all out through grants of no funding from the actual government funding to support that program?
We're still looking for long-term sustainable funding. We are still rationing naloxone. So we have about 8,000 kits left. We're slowly giving out through a variety of sources, primarily through needle exchange and similar overdose prevention programs, where we're trying to target our citizens we've determined are most at risk of potential overdose.
Thank you. And Mr. Banks, this is for you. If this is going to be a priority of the administration and a priority of the city of Baltimore, I think that it would be not that hard of an ask for us to actually have it in our budget, and for the finance director as well. If we're going to say that we know that we're in an opioid crisis, your priorities are where you spend your money. And if we're not spending any of our money to do this thing that works, we know that the fire department overturned 17 of these overdoses a day and probably could do a lot more if we had more resources. Mr. Amoros, a second question for you. You guys are also participating with your health inspectors, correct? Can you talk about, is that putting a strain on the resources? Because we know we need a lot more health inspectors.
Sure. So we are participating in the in priority business inspections. What we're doing, though, is we're actually working with our food license inspectors to try and follow up on restaurants that we knew we need to within the zones anyway because of our statutory obligation. So we're trying to fold that as much as possible into ongoing rotations to reduce the strain on our capacity in that area.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Amoros? Councilman? Thank you. Mr. Moore, you're up, sir. Can you run back through the list of the rec centers that are open late hours and tell me if they are actually in a VRI zone or not?
I'll tell you, all the centers are in VRI zones. Every last one of them. And East Baltimore, Rita Church, and we recently, about 4 months ago, opened up Oliver, and that was because the BPD saw some concerns. Trying to think of the park. There's a
which park? Mr. Director Moore, which zone is Rita Church in? Mr. Vetter, do you know?
So there's a new northeast.
So right, so it's in the northeast.
So, Director Moore, and I guess this is a question we can continue later. Just knowing I think Rita Church should be open late night. Just knowing that area and the area for which the VRO zone is in Bella Edison, a lot of those kids actually travel north to Heron Run to go to the rec center, and I know that we can have that conversation with Major Shorter as well, because of where Rita Church is located in the park and the issues that we've had with young people being robbed walking to and from the park. We should maybe look at trying to offer the other opportunity as well, so that we're capturing all the children.
And I'll tell you that 10th location that we're talking about, we're in negotiations right now with Brims Lane.
Yep,
that will address the issue at Bel Air Edmondson, because we don't have a facility that's in the heart of that. And that's what we're doing now, is negotiating with them space. We feel we have, they have the cafeteria that's kind of dubbed as a gym, but we're just really trying to negotiate us getting in their property. But that will be the 10th location.
Yeah, because my only concern is the children walking that distance to go to Rita Church. I don't want them walking through the park or in the area late at night. Any other questions for Mr. Moore?
Yep.
Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Moore. My concern is around lighting in the parks, specifically for me, Patterson Park. We are now finally getting the lights back on over there, but frankly, it just took too long for that to happen. Lights were out for.
Councilman, can I interrupt you for 1 second? We've been joined by Mayor Pugh. Mayor Pugh, thanks for joining us, man. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Lights in the park create when lights are out, creates a true safety hazard. We've had a number of burglaries, robberies, assaults of people walking through the park. And like I said, it took about a year. There was money allocated from the General Assembly to get the lights back on. So what is the plan from your office to improve the speed at which we get lights back on? Because again, we know that it's a major safety hazard when you have a park and an open space that has no lights. Second question is getting some enforcement of off-leash dogs. My fear is that at some point a citizen will get bit. You have very little enforcement. What are we doing to engage and activate the rangers who, to my knowledge, I know we're short, but are supposed to be functioning as officers in our parks, and we hardly ever hear of them doing much there.
And I'll start the lights. And I think we've had a conversation that when I first got here. I can't speak to what happened prior to my arriving in Baltimore, but one of my commitments was getting the lights back in Patterson, which I think I turned around considerably quick compared to what had transpired. And additionally, we had replaced the copper wiring in those lights at Patterson twice. It costs money every time we have to replace wiring. That impacts budget. So we still have limitations, not making excuses. But one of the things we did this time was strategically work with BG&E directly, who was installing these lights, the wiring for these lights, as well as we're doing direct barrier. One of probably the biggest mistakes, and there again, I can't address why somebody else thought differently. They use a conduit. And it's easier for a copper thief to pull wiring through a conduit. We're not doing that this time. It's a direct barrier, and we've negotiated an agreement with BG&E that will maintain that. And what we're doing is we're going to look at this model, and as we look at other lights and how we address the lighting issues there, look at something similar. On the answering your question about rangers, one of the things I've been working with Mr. Hammond is to look at our enforcement. Currently, as I've been informed, is our rangers write tickets even for parking. Majority of the time, those tickets, because it goes through it's an environmental ticket. Those people go to court, and the environmental court determines what those people can afford. So where it may be on the books for $250, it still comes down to that court. So we're having to look at what mechanism we need to change in this code to maybe take it to a different court so we can enforce. So we have rangers, and they're doing their job. I mean, this is a monumental task to address leash on dogs. I mean, we have over 200 plus parks throughout the city, but our rangers are doing a better job of trying to enforce. But there again, I think we have to strengthen our mechanism of enforcing the ticket that they're writing, as well as looking at other ways that we can improve the role of our rangers.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I think that I'll task the good councilman to reaching out to you about that, because I think that that's something that we could handle here legislatively.
Mr. Chair, I just had one question to the Director.
Councilman Pinkett.
Director Moore, with the focus on the rec centers that are in the VRI, as a result of that, have we been able to identify either the capital improvements that need to be made at these centers, or is it just increased programming?
Well, what we're doing is we continue to assess ways that we can be more innovative in our programming. As you know, we have the Drone Academy that we've rolled out at 4 of our locations. We're working with the Digital Harbor Foundation to establish STEAM centers throughout our city. We're getting ready to open up Lakeland Rec Center. That's going to be a STEAM center. We're looking at even DJ programs. We're going to identify 10 locations that we're going to introduce a DJ program, trying to continue to engage kids. So we're looking at more ways to improve not just programming in the VRI zones, but in all our centers across the board. And to answer your second part of that question is yes, we're looking at our capital budget. Currently, there has been some limitations because there were certain things that was in the pipeline. But what we're going to do is the things that's high priority, that's almost funded or close to funded, we're going to complete those projects. They're too further down in the pipeline. But then going forward, we've earmarked what we call a line for park maintenance buildings or park buildings, I think is a capital. That fund is going to be used to look at existing rec centers as well as some parks and seeing what is those on-calls responsible, as well as those simple things that we can do. If it's flooring that needs to be replaced, if it's lighting upgrades. So we have money that's in this year's proposed capital budget to address those needs.
No, I mean, it's good to hear you say that because I had the opportunity to go visit Lillian Jones Rec and just spend some time with the kids, and just going in there, you can notice some capital improvements, from floors, the lighting. So I just wanted to make certain that we weren't just programming is good, and we should continue to enhance that. But I wanted to make certain we were addressing those capital needs as well. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Chief Ham, I believe that Councilman Pinkett has a question for you.
Thank you,
Good
Chief
evening,
Ham.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
First of all, I want to thank you. I know that Dr. Santalisa mentioned it earlier, but your collaboration, your partnership with Western District Major Briscoe, and helping us to address issues related to drug trafficking around New Song Academy, Gilmore, and William Penderhughes. I really appreciate you working with the community and the school on that. I think it's a model of how we should attack those types of issues. I just had two questions. I wanted to hear a little bit about how we are addressing truancy and squeegee kids, and is this a part of the focus as well? And how is school police helping with that issue?
When the mayor first came on, that was one of the concerns that she had. We actually did some initiatives around North and Howard, President Street. We worked with the Central District, with Northwest District, because we understand that they're on Gwynns Falls as well. What we've learned is a lot of those squeegee kids, some of them they're not school-age kids. Gotcha. They're 18, 19, 20 years old. The kids that we have identified, we have done follow-up on with the schools in terms of engaging them and working with Mr. Shaw and the Re-Engagement Center. But for the most part, the ones that we have encountered in our patrols have been older kids, young adults.
Okay. Just because you're right. A lot of times people make the assumption that they're school-aged, but just want to make certain that those that should be in school, that we're making efforts to get them back into school.
We actually engaged a young person at the end of last school year. I can't remember what school he went to, but he had missed like 50 days of school. And when we engaged him on the street, we were able to follow up with him, and we were able to get him back in school. But like I said, Councilman, for the most part, the ones that we have encountered have been young adults.
Okay. My second question, and I'm not certain if this is better for school police or for BPD. One thing that I've noticed is that a lot of the fluorescent safe routes to schools are some of our most violent areas in our neighborhood. And just curious to know, what role school police or BPD are doing to address the fact that we've identified these routes that we're telling kids to take in order to get to school, and some of those paths are the routes that we should be directing the kids away from.
What we've seen citywide, and like Dr. Santalisa said earlier, we've redeployed back into schools, so we're really limited in our abilities to be able to be out on the street for the most part. But what we have done is encourage schools to do like Frederick Elementary's been doing. They've been doing walking school buses where the school have been employing like parents or volunteers to pick up kids and walk a safe route with an adult through the community. We have, in the problematic areas, increased patrols as much as we could. We actually arrested 2 of 3 armed robbery suspects just today who robbed 2 students at Maryville, and we were able to recover a weapon from one of the young people, and they were charged as adults. They were 17-year-olds. We also recently arrested 2 adults who carjacked a kid at City about 2 or 3 weeks ago on a student parking lot and they actually are suspects in a robbery of a Merville student, and we actually put a plainclothes unit around Merville because of the increase that we've seen in robberies, and we were able to identify and arrest the 2 suspects from the carjacking, and they had a loaded handgun on them outside of Merville. So in those problematic areas where we've seen a significant increase, we've done initiatives with the police department. We've worked very closely with Major Short in the Northeast because that's where we've seen the most increase, especially around Lake Clifton, Merville, and some other schools around the Bel Air Edison neighborhood. So where we can, we do doing an increase, but for the most part, we're deployed to schools, and we try to focus on young people transitioning to and from school and the issues that occur at the schools on the campuses.
Thank you, Chief Hand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Child. Mr. Child, in your presentation, you talked about the 86% reduction in response time, which is awesome, and we know that how folks in the city are very concerned about cleaning. Can you break that out for us though? Are those all boarding, cleaning, and boarding? Do you have those numbers for dirty alleys or dirty streets as well?
We can provide that. I mean, but in all categories, we were able to focus more just because the quadrant's set up.
Mm-hmm.
And the folks and the equipments are much closer to the location, so we're able to deploy much more efficiently and so on, all that.
Thank you. And then just to my earlier point, because we have the quadrant, and my quadrant person, Yvonne, is awesome and excellent, are folks from the crews actually proactively looking for things within the VRI zones for water leaks or, unboarded properties that we had boarded before, dirty alleys, dirty streets, or are we relying on requests to do that?
No, we're doing actually both. Part of the quadrant set up was for that focus.
Yep.
Because the management, the supervisory staff are there within the zone, and there's expectation for them to patrol the area and to be proactive about generating SRs themselves.
Thank you. Any other questions for Director Chow? Thank you, Director. We will now have questions for Mr. Hickey. Councilman Cohen.
Hey, Terry.
Hi. Good evening.
Good evening. You had mentioned Head Start and the link with reducing violence at a very, very young age.
Yes.
I completely agree with that assessment and have probably read much the same research as you have. I'm curious, are we, while Head Start is great and it's excellent that we're seeing so much of it here in Baltimore, are we also, is there any strategy to move toward universal pre-kindergarten so that every kid, not just kids eligible for Head Start, but every kid could actually be exposed to pre-K? Because I think the long-term effects of early childhood education for every population are pretty well documented, both as a tool of retention for middle-class families and as a way to integrate schools early on, and just as a way for young people to begin learning together early. So I know this is partly a question for Dr. Santelices as well, but I'm curious from the mayor's office, are we moving in that direction?
Right. So I agree with you in this concept of giving all kids access to this. It's a conversation that's just started with the school system. I think that what we don't have right now is an early childhood school readiness strategy for the city. Right. That kind of grows out of what Be More for Healthy Babies was. So I can say that these are conversations that we're sort of actively pulling together and thinking about now, and I'd love to follow up and talk more, get your sense.
Okay. Nice.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Hickey, along those same lines, that community schools is a very important thing to me. And basically it's the same question that my colleague just asked about pre-K. I believe that every city school should be a community school. Do we have a plan to achieve that goal? And we know that has a caveat because there are some schools in the city, charter schools, who would maybe exempt for that. But we know that the community schools model works. We see that they're more successful and they have a better impact on the community. Can you talk about how you guys are thinking about expanding the community schools model?
Sure. So I think that goal number one is to make sure that the strategy is stable going into the next year. We're sitting down talking with Family League right now about how to work together to manage the entire strategy and what more existing funds can be repurposed out of maybe administrative costs into trying to do more. I think where we are now is a renewal of the community school strategy with the existing partners and then trying to figure out where do we pull resources from in order to expand that. I mean, you and I have had a conversation before that I understand the original reason behind the school investment, but I think figuring out a way that schools can enter into that community school strategy without having to sacrifice an art teacher or another after-school program is where we want to go. And then, but what I think, though, there's a much bigger picture around violence reduction in general and human services, which is, although community schools are in some part an academic strategy, seeing how we can work to focus more on the community part of community schools to start to push more resources like eviction prevention, rental assistance, access to housing, youth programs into those community school hubs and provide resources even if we don't have the ability to go full scale into coordinators at every school. But that is certainly a direction that we want to move in. We're in the same place.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Hickey? Director Stoser, you're up next, sir.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Director, you hit on something that I know because I know Stephanie and know the work that she does and is doing at the planning department. But could you expand upon, for me, one of the things I was hoping to hear from you guys today is exactly directly how you are looking at, for example, targeting capital projects in the VIR zones and areas that we know need these investments that haven't gotten them over time, and we know we're all about equity and inclusion into making sure the areas in the city that have been forgotten for far too long have gotten. Have you guys had those conversations about capital projects that we can put forth in the VRI zones and other areas like them?
I mean, I think we are in the process of having those conversations as we assess what's come out of the first 3 or 4 months of the initiative and tying that to the larger community redevelopment strategy that will be launching next month with the mayor's office and the neighborhood sub-cabinet that's just getting started. So, but it is all these pieces tie together, and those places that are experiencing the most crime have typically also had very significant disinvestment over time and lack basic things that a holistic community really needs. And that's what the community redevelopment strategy is all about. So I think we are in a very good position as the planning department and as the coordinators of the capital program to bring all these pieces together. And that's should be your expectation, and it's my expectation as well.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Employment Development, Councilman Cohen.
Hey, Jason. Apologies for missing your original, but I caught the gist, which is that we're about 5,000 or 6,000 slots short for YouthWorks this summer. Is that accurate? In terms of kids that have applied versus slots that are available.
I see. I mean, as we're speaking now, or as of Monday, we had about 4,200 slots developed. That's actually ahead of last year. The slots, a number of organizations just aren't ready to commit in February, but I don't have any reason to believe we won't get to last year's number. But last year's number is not likely to meet the need, or we pretty much know it's not going to meet the need for this year's, if that's what you're getting to.
And so then what happens to the kids that don't get jobs?
Yeah, so that's what I'm worried about, and I assume that's what's behind your question. So that's why we are trying, and it's not for us, it's about, there's 3 ingredients, right? The one is the youth. We have that in large numbers. We need the slots, and we need the resources to pay the young people, because they're not going to work for free. They're getting paid the minimum wage, which this summer, as you know, will be $10 an hour. So if we have slots, if we develop slots and we don't have the wages, then we just have to call back the employers and say, I'm sorry, we can't do it this year. If it's the other way around, which I don't think it would be. If we had the money and we didn't have the slots, we would have no place for them to work. So we have to develop both. And right now, the holdup, I would say, is more on the resource side than the slot side.
So would you say it will be a big public safety crisis if we have 5,000 to 6,000 teenagers that want jobs and can't get jobs?
I would say that making sure that young people have jobs, research would show in summer employment programs reduces violence, and that's one of the reasons why we're so out there compared to many of our counterparts in other cities to make sure that young people know of these opportunities.
We worked together last year on a pilot program called This Is Working. The idea was you have a coordinator who helps between the business and the young people, and also it was place-based with a couple of schools. Obviously, want to advocate for that model because I think that one of the things I hear a lot, and you hear a lot from our business owners around the city, is we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to take on young people. We're frightened that something bad will happen. And having this coordinator, surprise, surprise, ameliorated many of the problems that came up. I wanted to talk about what it would take to have that be a sustainable program.
It's just about resources. So the Solomon's choice that we have every year is, we've got one pool of money. So if we decide to hire a coordinator, let's just pick a number of $48,000, we can do that, but then that's 30 less slots for young people, and that's a terrible choice to have to make. So I agree with you. The initiative last year was really successful, and we certainly value it and would love to continue it. It's just simply a resource decision, and it's given where the numbers are now, it's very hard to pull resources away from wages for young people to do that. But it's worth considering, and it's worth more people knowing about what can be done.
Yep. I mean, none of those kids committed any crimes over the summer. They stayed out of trouble. From all reports, their grades have improved when they went back to school. So I think, when we as a city think about what it would mean to meaningfully reduce violence and also just improve the trajectory of our young people, to me, this is where resources need to be focused.
And I would just add, I completely agree. I would also add that I don't really want to be here next year having the same conversation. Like, we have to figure out a sustainable model so that we're not scrambling every year to meet this demand. Because, again, what we all know is kids want to work. Young people want to work.
Yep. And then the last thing I would ask in the same regard is not just summer jobs, but year-round. I mean, we hear that all the time. The young people, the needs don't go away when they go back to school. In fact, in some ways, they just increase. Strategy plan toward longer-term year-round jobs for MOAD?
So a couple things. One is we did recently have a press conference with the mayor highlighting 3 young people and 3 employers with their employers to talk about, not only was it about summer jobs, but each of those employers committed to those young people after the summer. So they stayed on and they're still working there when we had our press conference a couple weeks ago. And we did that for a reason, because it's not only about summer. And then, as I mentioned, for this May, on May 9th, we will have a job fair for high school seniors. I know that's not the other grades, but starting with the high school seniors, where we're going to bring employers who are making a commitment to hiring young people who are 17, 18 years old. And we hope that's a model we can expand.
Councilwoman Snead.
I was just curious to, if you could tell us, not here in public, but can let us know if every agency actually took on young people last year.
I actually can tell you, and Mayor Pugh made that a major focus, and every agency came through, made a commitment, used their budgets to pay for the young people, and I'm grateful, and the young people had a great experience.
And that will be the policy for this year as well?
I certainly expect so.
Thank you. Last but not least, Mr. Vedder. And thank you, sir, for coordinating today's efforts. Can you talk you and we spoke, and I know he's not here, but the vice chair, actually, we sent a letter about the city-wide cameras. Can you
Yes.
talk about what's going to go into more in depth, what's going to go into where those cameras are, but also talk about what prevents cameras from going into certain places, because we know infrastructure stuff that prevents it as well.
Yeah, it's been a learning experience, and I know more about this than I ever thought I would. So just to give you some insight into the process, we have a certain amount of funding. We think that's going to be enough to do about 55 cameras, but it could be more, it could be less, depending on the cost per camera. We assumed the average cost for one camera to be about $25,000 or $30,000, but that can go all the way from $10,000 per camera to $80,000 per camera, depending on the infrastructure. And so the way it works is that there's a fiber network throughout the city, fiber optic cable, and in order to have City Watch cameras, you need to have at least one in the area connected to that fiber. So the fiber goes along the major corridors, and you've got to build that fiber out to get to kind of the side streets and things like that. But the further you go, the more expensive it gets. So you will have certain areas that it's just cost prohibitive to put the cameras. So what we've been doing is we've been looking at the crime data. We've been overlaying the existing camera locations and basically asking, based on the crime data, what are the ideal locations? And we plot it out that way. We go out, we do a survey of the area, we develop a cost estimate for how much that installation will cost, and if it's feasible, we'll move forward. And if it's not, we'll have to defer that project. So we're looking, and this is preliminary, and I realize that we're live on TV, so I just want to note that it's preliminary, but we do have camera locations, about 6 different networks identified in East and West Baltimore. I'm looking for it now, but we're looking at one network in the western, in the Harlem Park, Heritage Crossing area. We're looking at another spot in the eastern around the Milton Montford area. We're looking at a network in Oliver. We're looking at a network in West Baltimore that's actually the Southwest District, kind of Southwest VRI zone, the Boyd Booth area along Baltimore Street out at Franklintown Road. We're looking at some in the Mondawmin area as well. So those are some of the areas that we're looking at that don't have cameras right now, where it appears that it's feasible to do the project. So we're going to do the first couple of networks hopefully starting in March into April. And then we'll just do them on a rolling basis like that until we get to the 55 or however much our budget permits us to do.
Thank you. And next thing I want to talk about is safe streets, because of course that's something that this council cares deeply about, and the expansion. Just for the record, can you talk about, I know that there's a bill in Annapolis that, as you know, I testified in support of before city delegation. Talk about how we're going to make the funding whole for the program, and like you, I agree that we have to spread it out over time, and it may not be able to do it all at once just because it's a complicated process. Because you talk about how we're going to make the program whole and ensure that we have the stream there from now until
As you know, the funding for the program, it really got started with federal grant funds. As those federal grant funds dried up, there was some state funding, and the state funding went away. And now almost 100% of the program is city general funds, with some smaller grants that provide some add-on services to the program. So it's a little bit of a mix right now. Like I mentioned before, we think that this total expansion budget, 6 new sites over some period of time, is about $3 to $3.5 million for the new sites, and that doesn't count what we're already putting into the existing. So one of the really big priorities for the program, in order to make it as successful as we know it can be, is to take care of the existing workers. And a lot of those workers have been at their sites for a period of years, no pay increase whatsoever. And we want to address that because it's barely a livable salary right now. They're doing incredibly serious work, dangerous work, and incredibly important for the city. So we want to build that in as well. And so in terms of where the money's going to come from, there are a lot of conversations in Annapolis right now. You testified in favor of the one Delegate Branch's funding bill. We're optimistic. If it's not through that bill, but through the budget, there's a lot of engagement about the Safe Streets program in Annapolis right now on both sides. So remains to be seen how much will come from that, and so we'll know how much money we have by the end of session from the state, and that'll coincide with the city council budget process. So for this expansion, whatever that gap is after session, I think we'll be talking about that with the council and hope to accomplish it through city funds.
Yes, sir. And just to add, and Director Raymond, I know Mr. Vetta knows I talk about this all the time, and Mr. Gillis from the police department is still here. I think that it would be a good idea for us to look and see if we could actually use asset forfeiture funds to fund Safe Streets, because, in the past I've asked what we can use it for, and the feds basically regulate that it has to be for public safety uses only. But to my knowledge, they have not said that we can't use it for public health approaches to public safety.
It's an interesting question, and we can do that research.
Yep. Councilman Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vetter. Similar question to what I asked the commissioner. I'm curious your thoughts from MOCJ on sort of some of the failures that have come from the war on drugs and the intense focus on treating drugs as a criminal issue when, to my mind, is largely a health issue. All the research we now have on addiction and people's predisposition to addiction and sort of what it does chemically, and yet we've spent so much time, so much money, and so much wasted life chasing around drug users and drug distributors. I'm curious your thoughts on shifting the focus toward violent crime, robberies, burglaries, homicides, assaults, all the above, understanding that drugs, violence often follows drugs, but I'd be curious to get your take on actually taking a public health approach to what really strikes me as a public health crisis.
Yeah, Councilman, I would agree with the views that you expressed. We know.
Mr. Better, come closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry. There's no greater champion of this than Dr. Wen in the health department in terms of treating addiction to drugs like a public health crisis and acknowledging it as a disease and lining up government's response to it, as a disease. So we're 100% in support of those efforts. I made some comments earlier about how to reduce violence in urban cities based on the research, and we look at a lot of research. And I mentioned a focus on gangs and individuals and guns in geographic locations. Those things have been proven to work when they're done correctly. Focusing law enforcement resources on drugs, as you pointed out, has been a failure. So I think that our view is in alignment with the sentiment that you expressed there.
Can we expect any policy change in that direction from MOCJ? Yeah,
well, I'd say that the most prominent example of policy change has been the law enforcement assisted diversion program that the health department and the police department and the state's attorney's office are collaborating on. That's been very successful, but it's driven by the number of slots you have available for case management. And so the policy shift there, and this is there actually is a BPD policy on lead. The policy shift there is that rather than arresting someone, you're diverted into treatment pre-booking. And so that has been a shift in Baltimore that many other cities haven't actually taken. That's another funding issue. I know that that's a program being discussed in Annapolis, but we think that model works and that should be expanded.
Right. My understanding, great program, very small pilot in terms of what we're actually doing with it.
Yeah, it's it's got 60 or 70 treatment slots,
Right.
I believe, and the number of people addicted to drugs in Baltimore is far greater than that, as you know.
Yep. Okay.
Councilman Pickett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the LEAD program. So are we planning on expanding it or not? And if so, are we planning on expanding it into one of the VRI areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we get to the point of expansion, we would take a look at the data to see where the issues are the most prevalent, whether or not it's in the VRI zone. I think right now, because of funding issues, the LEAD program, which is run out of Behavioral Health Systems of Baltimore, is focused on securing funding to maintain the current program that they have. But I know that they would love to expand it, if the resources are there to do it.
Okay. I wanted to dovetail off of Chairman Scott's question related to Safe Streets. My experience with the Sandtown-Winchester site of Safe Streets has been that because of their how effective they are, that a lot of the violence is happening just outside of their particular area. When we're making a decision about the expansion and where we're going to expand, do we take that in consideration, that co-locating another site adjacent to another one, or are we just looking to diversify them throughout the city, so not putting one next to another, or are we seeing the potential benefit of having two safe streets next to one another?
I think that there is a potential benefit to doing that. Our ability to direct it is a little bit limited because the map that I showed earlier shows all eligible posts within the city. And where we end up expanding may depend on what bidders, community-based organizations that are bidders, come back with.
Okay.
And I just know that based on prior conversations with some of the current CBO organizations, that they're interested in doing more, and they would see the benefits of a single operator doing multiple sites and things like that. So I think that that's part of the equation, but I'd also urge the council that when the RFP is issued, it's a public document at that point, and you can be talking to potential interested parties to come up with creative proposals like that. Okay. That will not just expand the program, but strengthen existing sites as well.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you. Just in closing, Mr. Vedder, some of the things that we would like to hear from you guys about in the future is we all know that we believe that this is a public health crisis, so we think that our budget should reflect that. We would like to see funding increases for public health approaches to reducing crime. We know we have Safe Streets in Roca, but there are many other things that we can do, and we'd like to hear from you guys when we call you back about what's the plan to do that. Also, if possible, Mr. Venno, if you could provide a weekly VRI update to the members of the committee and the rest of the council, that would be greatly appreciated. And because we are in the beginning of the year, we have a new police commissioner. The next time that you guys come in, we would like to have a more detailed plan about how we're going to coordinate for violence. Today's presentation was great, but guys know we want to see metrics and measures for each department, how we're going to carry out each program, each focus, and how we're going to expand it over this 3-year period that we've asked for. Thank you so much for being here today, and with that, this committee stands in recess.